Pokemon Yellow and I have been through it over the years. This was the first video game I ever got. It was the game that my parents purchased for me with my Game Boy Color when I originally got the console, and now I'm almost entirely certain that it's the game I've sunk the most hours of my life into. If not directly playing, then thinking about. And so this feels like the close of a major chapter in my life, because there are now only 5 videos left in this series. But there are 7 Pokemon left to rank, and I have been planning these final videos for quite some time. Remaining to be ranked in the tier list are Charizard, Blastoise, Venusaur, Dragonite, Mew, Ditto, and Mewtwo. So for the final month of these Pokemon Yellow videos, we have the final stages of the starters, the pseudo-legendary, the mythical, the gimmickmon, and finally the ultimate legendary. So let's start things off with the starters today. Now, I have played these 3 before in this video. You probably remember it. It's one of the best viewed on my channel. However, when I played that video, I did things a little bit differently. I wasn't using rare candies, I was requiring Pokemon to be extremely consistent during their playthroughs, and I was also starting unevolved and then evolving throughout the playthroughs. My format has evolved a lot since I released that video 4 years ago on December 24th, 2021. So today we are going to do a modern retelling of the video with my current rules. Let's start things with Blastoise. For base stats, it has 79 HP, 78 speed, giving it a 15.23% chance to crit in Generation 1, 83 attack, 85 special, and 100 defense. As far as base stat total distributions go, this is not particularly good for a solo challenge. Having high defense is never really what you want for these solo challenges. Also, low-ish speed, when compared with the other starters, is not really an asset in Pokemon Yellow, because in the mid-game the gym leaders have a massive level buff when compared with their red and blue counterparts. Blastoise might not be moving first against Pokemon like Koga's Venomoth, Sabrina's entire team, and some of Blaine's Pokemon. And you would think that water types wouldn't have to fear Blaine. After all, in red and blue he is absolutely terrible, but I have learned otherwise in Pokemon Yellow. He's actually one of the best gym leaders in this game. As far as move pool goes, Blastoise is pretty good right at the start. It has Tackle, Tail Whip, Bubble, and Water Gun, and through level up it starts learning new moves at level 24. Bite, then Withdraw at level 31, which will give me the ability to badge boost myself. Skull Bash at level 42, but do remember this move does not raise defense, so it's not as useful as you might think it would be. And finally, Hydro Pump at level 52. I'm not going to entirely write this move off as I once would on my channel. We'll talk about it more later when we get to the Safari Zone and can teach Blastoise Surf. With a lot of water types, it's not always the best option to go for. After all, in Generation 1 there is no move deleter, and water type coverage during the Elite Four is never really that good. It might absolutely destroy Bruno's team, but 4 of Lorelei's Pokemon resist water damage, as well as 4 of Lance's Pokemon. And Agatha's ghosts have high special, so water moves there are not always ideal. But Blastoise has pretty good coverage for all of these Pokemon that I have mentioned. Through TM and HM, it gets access to a wide range of moves. Mega Punch, Mega Kick, Body Slam, Takedown, Double Edge for normal moves, Bubble Beam, Water Gun, and Surf for water moves, Ice Beam, and Blizzard, all 3 fighting moves, which are honestly not very good, so I don't think I'm going to be using them, and finally all 3 ground moves. Continuing my reflection of my earlier days, I would have written off Fissure before, but today I won't. We'll talk about it once we get to the late game. In the early stages of the run, with Water Gun, it makes no sense for Blastoise to do anything other than minimum battles. While the trainer with the Caterpie inside the forest, who's mandatory, does take 4 hits to knock out, it can't threaten Blastoise because of my high defense. Defeating this level 10 Caterpie brings Blastoise up to level 8 before it then heads into Pewter City. Now here, I am going to skip the heal because it just wastes time. I'm going to skip the junior trainer inside of Brock's gym, and I am also going to skip the save before the first gym leader. And by playing the early game this way, I'm going to get an incredibly fast first split. With Water Gun, Blastoise can one-shot both Geodude and Onix. There is a way though for Brock to slow down my progress. That's because Onix outspeeds Blastoise. At level 9 I have 21 speed, whereas Onix has 23. That means there is the theoretical possibility that Blastoise can lose this battle. Bind over and over again from Onix, Brock somehow never choosing one of his other 3 moves, and Bind never missing. There is an astronomical probability of this happening, and of course it doesn't here. The Onix just goes for Screech I hit with Water Gun, and that's against that. A first split of 2 minutes and 18 seconds for the water type starter. But we're not going to switch away from it right now. Instead, we are going to continue with Blastoise. I want to talk about Route 3 because all three of the starters play this section of the game very differently. Blastoise is in the middle of the pack for the three starters here. It has Water Gun, which is pretty good against the enemy Pokemon. For example, this Caterpie is a 2-shot. There are some ways this can come back to bite me. For example, I have to 2-shot the following Weedle, which can poison Blastoise, and then I would have to open my inventory and use a healing item, which wastes a little bit more time. But overall, in this section of the game, Blastoise is fairly fast. To improve its progress in the game, I'm going to fight the Lass instead of the Bug Catcher. As we have seen, the bugs are 2-shots, so it doesn't make any sense to take him on. When I can just get through a team that only has 2 Pokemon on it, backtrack quickly to Pewter City, reset her position, and then squeeze by. This is typically the faster approach if you are 2-shotting the Pokemon in this section of the game. The only reason to fight the Bug Catcher is if you're able to 1-shot his Pokemon, because then you can avoid poison from the Weedle, which does slow most Pokemon down, and you also gain slightly more experience. But Blastoise still doesn't need extra experience in this section of the game. Inside Mount Moon, I'm going to go to the basement floor and pick up the TM for Mega Punch, giving Blastoise access to a better normal type move for the next section of the game. This is important because powerful normal damage is going to give me a solution to Misty's team, and then I can earn the Bubble Beam TM before Nugget Bridge. At the end of Mount Moon, I fight the Super Nerd. Here you can notice that Water Gun's PP is running pretty low. This is another reason why Mega Punch is useful for Blastoise. Teaching it helps replenish PP, which allows me to continue with the playthrough not having to heal in a Pokemon Center. I have not visited a Pokemon Center yet in this playthrough, and the first one is going to be Cerulean City just around the corner. During the fight against the Super Nerd, I was poisoned, so I had to open my bag. While I did this, I also taught Blastoise Bide. This move can be helpful against Misty as well. When compared with Mega Punch, it may feel less satisfying, but it's typically faster for knocking out her Starmie. After curing the poison, I pick up the Dome Fossil, which is something I only have so many more times to mention, so I might as well make good use of the time I have left over. With the best fossil in my bag, I defeat Jesse and James and head into Cerulean City to face Misty. In Pokemon Yellow, she has good AI, so against water types, she is only ever going to choose normal moves, or she'll use her X Defend on her Pokemon. In this case, that locks Staryu into only the item or tackle, and with Mega Punch, I can 2-shot. For Starmie, things are a little bit more complicated. Unlike Red and Blue, this Starmie has an additional move, Harden, so it can go for tackle, but it can also go for Harden. This complicates using Bide. If the Starmie just spams Harden while you're using Bide, then absolutely nothing happens and you waste your time. Also, since Starmie is faster than Blastoise, it can outspeed with Tackle, then use Harden while I'm accumulating energy, and use Tackle whenever I'm not using Bide. Misty is not smart enough to do this, but it always feels like that happens whenever I'm trying to use Bide against her with a slow Pokemon, so today I just chose to use Mega Punch over and over again, and Blastoise gets a critical hit, speeding things up here just a little bit. Starmie does boost its defense many times, but this still isn't enough for it to get a win. With Misty defeated, I earned myself the TM for Bubble Beam, which is going to massively speed up Blastoise's progress on Nugget Bridge. First, I have to beat the rival though. I didn't heal before this fight because I don't think that Blastoise needs to. I healed in Cerulean City right after Mount Moon. That sets my waypoint to that Pokemon Center, and then when I use Dig in the future, I will be returned to this location. I don't need to heal now because I have Bubble Beam and Water Gun, which is going to be enough to get me through all of Route 24 and 25. The rivals team is really easy to defeat whenever you're using a special attacker. Well, there are some exceptions to this. One of them I'm going to talk about in a little bit. In Blastoise's case though, it can't have its attacking stat lowered, and it's super effective against the Sandshrew. Without being exposed to Sand Attack and the ability to one-shot Rattata to avoid Hyper Fang, this fight is incredibly straightforward. The only thing that could go wrong here is getting very unlucky against the Eevee. It can go for Sand Attack, I could miss over and over again, and eventually it could get me with Tackle, but losing this way for Blastoise is extremely unlikely. I think this is a scenario similar to Brock. It is a theoretical way that the water type can lose, but it's just never really going to happen in practice. Maybe I'm being a little bit too overconfident against Sand Attack. We all have seen just how awful this move can get in Generation 1. Okay, let's talk about Route 24 for Blastoise. I think a good example of this is the first two fights. The Bug Catcher, I can one-shot both of his Pokemon with Water Gun, saving Bubble Beam PP. This also lets me avoid the possibility of getting poisoned by a move like Poison Sting. The next trainer is a lass who has a Pidgey and a Nidoran female. The Pidgey loves to use Sand Attack, and the Nidoran female is pretty bulky, so it usually usually takes multiple turns to knock out, but Blastoise with Bubble Beam is able to one-shot both of these Pokemon. At the very end of Route 25, right before Bill's house, I have to face the first mandatory grass type of the playthrough, but Blastoise with Mega Punch can one-shot both of these Oddish. And by this point, Water Gun is even able to one-shot the Pidgey. It would have done so even if I didn't get the critical hit there. Leveling up to 24 at the end of this battle, Blastoise has a chance to learn Bite, but this move comes a little bit too late into the playthrough to be truly useful. One potential reason to teach it to Blastoise is because Mega Punch's PP is getting pretty low. Using Bite and Water Gun, I could potentially get to the SS Hand, teach Body Slam and Dig, and then continue with the playthrough without having to heal another time. I'm treating this like a first playthrough though, since I've never played Blastoise starting fully evolved in Pokemon Yellow, so I did decide to stop by the Pokemon Center before proceeding to the rocket outside of Cerulean City. I think I'm probably playing over safe here, and that Blastoise is going to be able to be a lot more aggressive in its follow-up playthrough. On the SSN, I continue to play safely, picking up the TM for Rest, and I would be very surprised if I didn't end up cutting this item for my follow-up playthrough. It's really good when you're blind and you don't know your damage ranges, and then you can just kind of squeeze through a battle healing once or twice, but it's not nearly as good when you do know all your damage ranges, because in most cases you can find a path to success without having to heal. It's also worth noting that healing with Rest during a battle wastes a bunch of time, and in some cases even more than you would have wasted by just simply resetting. The other item which I think is going to stay for my follow-up playthrough is the TM for Body Slam. This is undoubtedly the most used normal move in Generation 1, and it's for good reason. 85 base power, 100% accuracy, and a 33% chance to paralyze. For the rival, Blastoise has an incredibly good moveset: Bubble Beam, Body Slam, Dig, and Bite. Bubble Beam is able to one-shot Spearow, Rattata, and Sandshrew, and then I can use Body Slam or Dig against the Eevee. In this case, Dig will do better damage, but I went for Body Slam since I think it could be a little bit faster and I have upside for a critical hit, which I do get here, one-shotting the rival's ace. Now it's time for Lieutenant Surge. Probably the worst gym leader in Generation 1, although he's quite unpredictable, so he could still get a win. Surge has a lot of things working in his favor: a type advantage, an outspeed with Raichu. Also, Blastoise isn't healed fully because I didn't think it was necessary going into this battle. If I get hit by Thunderbolt, I'm pretty sure I just lose, and if I get hit by other moves, I'm probably going to win. Raichu's Mega Punch and Mega Kick shouldn't do that much damage since my defense stat is fairly high. And Growl is definitely annoying because then I won't one-shot with Dig, well, unless Blastoise gets a critical hit, which it does, so Raichu faints, and I take an incredibly easy win against the third gym leader. For me, this is where the early game of Pokemon Yellow ends. Blastoise gets a split here of 12 minutes and 27 seconds. It's time now for my personal favorite starter, Venusaur. Of the three starters, it undoubtedly has the best base stat distribution: 80 HP, 80 speed for a 15.63% chance to crit, 82 attack, 100 special, and 83 defense. 100 special is both amazing offensively as well as defensively in Generation 1, and it seems like Venusaur is set up for success. But then you look at its move pool, and things just aren't nearly as good as they are for Blastoise. It has Tackle, Growl, Leech Seed, and Vine Whip at the start. 4 moves which are just fine, I guess. Tackle is the same as Blastoise, but Leech Seed is really not as good as Water Gun, and Vine Whip, while better than Bubble, only has 10 PP. Plus, I am really going to make a case for why the Grass type is the worst elemental typing to have in the early game. Beyond that, through level up, Venusaur gets Poison Powder at 22, Razor Leaf at 30, which will always get critical hits because of our base speed, Growth at 43, which cannot boost the power of Razor Leaf because Razor Leaf is always getting critical hits, so it bypasses stat changes, Sleep Powder at level 55, which is very late into the playthrough, and then Solar Beam at 65, which is almost useless in Generation 1 since Weather wasn't introduced to the series yet. Through TM and HM, Venusaur's set is incredibly limited. I will read every single one of these moves: Toxic, Body Slam, Takedown, Double Edge, Hyper Beam, Rage, Mega Drain, Solar Beam, Mimic, Double Team, Reflect, Bide, Rest, Substitute, and Cut. Oh wait, I forgot one move: Swords Dance, by far the best move that Venusaur can learn. If I filter the Pokemon Yellow tier list and show only grass types, the reason a Pokemon like Victory Bell is sitting at the very top is because it gets Swords Dance. If Swords Dance was taken away from them, I think that they would all perform much worse. Although sleep moves are very good in Generation 1, so maybe they would still find a way to have some level of success. It's also worth worth noting, out of all of these grass types, which I have ranked every single one except Venusaur, only 2 of them don't get access to Swords Dance: Exeggutor and Execute. And this is a good example as to why Swords Dance is so important for grass types. Exeggutor is the worst fully evolved grass type in the game. It's also worse than both Bulbasaur and Bellsprout currently in the tier list, and I don't think I could make Exeggutor's results much better. Plus, I know that I could improve both Bulbasaur and Bellsprout, and I'm pretty sure that I could improve their results significantly more than I could with Exeggutor. Also, another Pokemon that doesn't get Swords Dance: Execute, the first stage of Exeggutor, and it is ranked dead last out of all of the grass types. Another thing to mention here is that both Exeggutor and Execute can use sleep-inducing moves, but they get access to Hypnosis, which is far worse than Sleep Powder. What I'm really trying to say in the most long-winded way possible is that the success of grass types in Generation 1 largely is due to 2 moves: Swords Dance and Sleep Powder. Unfortunately for Venusaur, it is not going to get access to these moves for quite some time. And this wouldn't be so bad if we were Victory Bell and we got access to a poison move at the beginning. Acid is actually pretty good against bug types in the early stages of the game, and it gives a solution with the same type attack bonus to a lot of other threats. But with Venusaur, we have Tackle. So for example, against the mandatory bug catcher in the forest, I have to very slowly knock out his Caterpie. To make this just a little bit faster, I set up Leech Seed on turn 1, and then to minimize damage from the level 10 Caterpie, I went for Growl. Also, I really want to emphasize here just how little damage Venusaur does with every hit from Tackle. This is why Leech Life is helpful here, because I'm draining a little bit of health and I'm saving maybe 1 or 2 turns in the process. Plus I can gain back a bunch of health, which means I won't have to heal in Pewter City. Brock is, as expected, very easy since Vine Whip can one-shot both the Geodude and the Onix. There's the same problem here that Blastoise has. Venusaur can't outspeed the Onix, so I could technically lose to Bind, but again, that's not going to happen practically. Still, coming out of the Brock split, Venusaur is slower than Blastoise. It gets a time here of 2 minutes and 32 seconds. Now, it is going to continue to slow down over the next section of the game. I have so much to complain about here, so strap in. The bug catcher at the beginning of Route 3 takes a ridiculous number of turns for Venusaur. Tackle has a 48.1% chance to 3-shot the Caterpie, although there is upside here. If the enemy goes for String Shot, then it badge boosts my attack stat, and Tackle will 3-shot. On the Weedle, I have to 3-hit with Tackle, and then on the final Caterpie, I have to 3-hit with Tackle. By the way, both of these Pokemon have an 86.1% chance to get knocked out by Tackle without badge boosts. And I lose my boosts before the final Caterpie because all of the starters have the medium slow growth rate, meaning they level up incredibly quickly in the early game. If you thought Venusaur was in the clear now, no it's not. It has to go up against youngster Ben. His Rattata might take only 2 turns to knock out with Vine Whip, but then we have an Ekans. This Pokemon takes 3 shots with Tackle, and that gives it time to go for Wrap, wasting a ton of Venusaur's time. Luckily in today's playthrough, Wrap only hits twice, and it only used it once during the battle. Okay, you want to see a really painful damage range? With Tackle, I critical hit the Lass's Nidoran. This does more than half, and then my follow-up Tackle just barely doesn't knock out. The Nidoran missed its Leer, by the way, so I would have been badge boosted if it hadn't, and then I would have 2-shot. Also, anytime the enemy gets something like a critical hit, which Horn Attack does here, it slows me down. It both prints the critical hit text, but it also animates the health bar for a longer period of time. Route 3 continues to be a slog. The final trainer has a Metapod. I have to knock this out with Tackle, or at least it seems like Tackle is the better option, but at some point Vine Whip is going to be better as this thing sets up over and over again with Harden. The irony of all of this for Venusaur is that once I reach Mount Moon, there is a trainer here that I can knock out very quickly, but he's not mandatory. And fighting this hiker is not really helpful since Misty is just around the corner and I have a type advantage against her. The simple way to summarize what's happening in the early game for Venusaur is that it's very strong against every single gym leader, but it's really bad against all of the random mandatory NPCs. To continue these examples, the super nerd that guards the fossils, he has 2 poison type Pokemon, and then Jesse and James right before Cerulean City. During this battle, I want to draw your attention to Poison Sting. Venusaur's grass type is weak to this move, but the poison type resists it. This means Poison Sting should be neutrally effective, but Venusaur in Generation 1 find a way to make poison moves a disadvantage in the early game. While this move is dealing neutral damage, the text has no idea what it's doing. Because of a glitch, it constantly prints that these moves are not very effective, and all of these extra frames really do add up. By the time I beat Jesse and James, Venusaur is level 18. Inside the Cerulean City gym, the trend continues. There's an optional trainer who we are really good against, and then this junior trainer who I'm not going to show you the footage of. She has a Goldeen that has Peck, which is super effective against the grass type. Come on. Anyway, let's take on Misty. This fight is going to be incredibly relatively easy. While she does have a Psychic type, it doesn't have any Psychic type moves, and Vine Whip is super effective here. If I really needed to gain back health, I could also go for Leech Seed, but I don't need to do this. Venusaur levels up to 20 over a damage rounding threshold before the Starmie, and then my first Vine Whip gets a crit, doing much more than half. Misty uses a useless X defend, and my second Vine Whip knocks out her ace. Unlike Blastoise, as a special attacker, we do not have an advantage against the rival. First of all, the Spearow at the beginning of the battle has Peck, and I have to knock it out using Tackle. This means it will take 3 turns, provided that I don't miss with Tackle, which I do on the second turn. This also gives Spearow more time to go for Growl, lowering my physical attack, and prolonging the battle here against the first Pokemon, giving it more and more time to use Growl or Peck, but it can also soften Venusaur up with Leer. Luckily for me, once I knock out the Spearow, the Sandshrew is at least a one-hit with Vine Whip, and so is the following Rattata. But if things went really bad against the Spearow, which they did not in this case, I could see Venusaur then losing to the Eevee. It has relatively high special, it knows Sand Attack, it knows Growl and Tail Whip, and there's real potential with Sand Attack for Vine Whip to run out of PP, meaning I would have to resort back to using Tackle, and if Spearow was awful at the beginning of the battle, then this might even be very ineffective. Now, I'm speaking about all of this theoretically. I don't think that Venusaur is really going to have problems against the rival, and it doesn't in this playthrough. But what's more important to emphasize here is the duration of these battles. For Blastoise, this fight took half as much time as it took for Venusaur. And we are not through the grinder yet, because after the rival, because of Sand Attack, my PP was relatively low, and since I'm so close to the Pokemon Center, I backtracked now to heal to restore my PP before continuing with Nugget Bridge. After all, this is the area of the game that has the highest density of mandatory trainers. So that's another small way that Venusaur loses some time. Then we have to face the first Bug Catcher on Route 24. It takes Venusaur 2 hits to knock out both of his Pokemon, and when the Caterpie goes down, I have the chance to learn Poison Powder, a move which is insultingly useless at this point in the game. There are so many poison types, like the following Weedle, which luckily I critical hit, and it does go down in only 1 turn. That is a refreshing reprieve for Venusaur. The next battle is against a Pidgey and a Nidoran female. I miss here so much because of Sand Attack. It is infinitely annoying. Also, while I'm missing, the Nidoran female uses Growl, lowering my physical attack so that I do less and less damage to it on every single turn. This is depleting my PP, making it more likely that Venusaur is going to need to backtrack to Cerulean City for a second time to restore its moves before continuing with this section of the game. The following trainer has Rattata, Ekans, and Zubat. I have to mention the last of these Pokemon because Leech Life in Generation 1 does super effective damage to Grass and Poison type Pokemon, so it's doing 4 times damage against Venusaur, and it's also going to heal Zubat, which makes this an incredibly scary move. Luckily, I'm a final stage Pokemon, so I don't really have to worry, and I'm still able to 2-shot the Zubat. But things don't get much better from here. There's another Lass with Pidgey and Nidoran. There's a Rocket with Ekans and Zubat. Another Lass on Route 25 with 2 Nidoran. A Junior Trainer with Ekans. And finally the Oddish Lass with 2 Grass types which I have to use Tackle against. Is it over? No, it's not. There's a Rocket. He has a Machop, but he also has a Drowsy, which knows Hypnosis and Confusion, which is super effective against Venusaur. Of course, the Drowsy goes for Hypnosis. It hits on turn 1. Venusaur goes to sleep. This can last up to 7 turns in Generation 1, which makes me very scared of Confusion. Luckily, the Drowsy has no idea what it's doing, so it goes for Pound instead. Over and over and over again. Eventually, it does go for Confusion, and it even inflicts the status condition. That's a 10% chance, by the way. I am getting so unlucky in this battle. By the time I wake up, Drowsy hits with another Confusion, bringing Venusaur down to orange health. Tackle hits, but it doesn't knock out. Drowsy goes for Hypnosis again. Venusaur falls asleep. It snoozes. Confusion hits, not once, but twice. And I take my first reset here. This Rocket earned his custom art because this has happened to me in many playthroughs. It's not incredibly likely that something like this is going to happen, so provided I save in front of him, I'm pretty safe. And I did in this case since it's my first playthrough with Venusaur fully evolved. I defeat him on my next attempt, and then the gauntlet continues. I can't believe it. Venusaur is not through yet. We have to fight Sandy, who has 3 Pidgey, all which have Sand Attack, and if you can't one-hit them, then they have a chance to lower your accuracy and completely ruin your day when you're using Tackle. Of course, Venusaur cannot one-shot, unless it gets a critical hit. With the first 2 Pidgeys knocked out and no sand attacks affecting Venusaur, this fight's going to be a success. With her out of the way, I could complain about 2 other fights, but I'm not going to. On the SSN at long last, we can pick up the TM for Body Slam, and now we have a solution to flying and poison types. The rival is easy now. I can one-shot the Spearow, the Rattata, the Sandshrew, but I have to 2-shot the Eevee. Unless I get a critical hit, which Venusaur does here, mildly speeding up its early game. Next is Surge. This is an incredibly easy battle since I resist Thunderbolt. Mega Kick could do devastating damage with a critical hit, but Surge has no idea what he's doing. He uses an X speed on turn 1 even though Raichu was faster. Body Slam does about half, then Raichu uses Thunderbolt, which gets a critical hit, although Venusaur takes very little from it. I'm not able to knock out, but then hilariously Raichu goes for Growl. Surge is choosing literally all of the worst things at all of the worst moments. Venusaur gets a third gym split of 15 minutes even, putting it significantly behind Blastoise. So in the early game, there was only one more starter for me to look at, and that's Charizard. For a long time, I have really disliked this Pokemon because I'm not a huge fan of fire types in general, but I also don't really like how much of a fan favorite Charizard is. I have always preferred the weirder Pokemon, like Venomoth for example. It is definitely not a fan favorite, and Game Freak hasn't even given it anything new in recent generations. Charizard, on the other hand, has been given so much. 2 Mega Evolutions, a Dynamax form. I'm sure there's other things that I'm missing. I don't really follow what's going on with Charizard. This is a Pokemon that I actively dislike. And then 4 years ago, I tried to make it consistent during a solo challenge. And well, Charizard just completely fell apart. It is terrible at playing this game consistently. I am going to stick to that because I think of the 3 starters, if your goal is to play a Nuzlocke through Pokemon Yellow, Charizard is by far the worst pick. Misty, Giovanni, Lorelei, Lance, and the Champion all have Pokemon that can truly ruin Charizard's day. Yes, both Venusaur and Blastoise have their own flaws, but they're nowhere near as extreme as Charizard's are. For example, Giovanni's Rhydon hitting you with a Rock Slide is just not something that you're ever going to survive until you level up a ridiculous amount. And most Nuzlocks these days are hardcore Nuzlocks with level caps, and if you have a level cap, I just don't know what Charizard is gonna do, especially if you ban Double Team. Anyways, for base stats, Charizard has 78 HP, 100 speed, a 19.53% chance to crit, 84 attack, 85 special, and 78 defense. These base stats are not as good as Venusaur's. I think they might be slightly better than Blastoise, but I'm not entirely sure. Charizard is definitely over-invested into speed. This causes problems in multiple different ways. Number 1, it's gonna get a ton of critical hits, which in the early game is a good thing, but in the late game is going to be a bad thing, because Charizard's move pool is actually pretty decent. It starts with Scratch, Growl, Ember, and Leer. Then through level up, it learns Rage, Slash, Flamethrower. Thankfully, a fire type gets Flamethrower. And then finally, the best fire move in the game, Fire Spin. Thank you so much, Game Freak. It makes so much sense for Charizard to learn this at level 55 instead of a move like Fire Blast. Both Blastoise and Venusaur get Hydro Pump and Solar Beam respectively. Why does Charizard not learn Fire Blast by level up? I really don't get it. I truly believe that Game Freak thought that Fire Spin was the best fire move in the game, and I have no idea why they thought that. 70% accuracy is abysmal. Through TM and HM, things get really good for Charizard. Mega Punch, Swords Dance, Mega Kick, Body Slam, Takedown, Double Edge. All 3 fighting moves, Dragon Rage, just in case you want to waste time buying Game Corner coins, which I definitely don't during these runs. All 3 ground type moves, Fire Blast, and as a yellow version exclusive, Fly. In today's playthrough, I was feeling a little bit confident. I went into the Bug Catcher in Viridian Forest on minimum battles just to see if Charizard could pull it off against Brock. Without doing extra training, Charizard is going to do very little damage to Brock's Pokemon, and because of that, there is a chance that I'm going to lose. However, it's very fast at beating the mandatory Bug Catcher's Caterpie, faster than both of the other starters. So let's see if I can pull Brock off. Against Geodude, Ember is going to be a 6-shot, but there is some upside here. If Charizard burns the Geodude, then Brock will immediately use one of his 5 full heals. Also, once I burn Geodude, its attack stat is going to be lowered, and using a full heal in battle will not restore attack. And every subsequent burn that I'm able to inflict will have the attack stat again, causing the Geodude to do less and less damage. But I'm not lucky enough to burn the Geodude. It takes me under half health before Charizard knocks it out and moves on to the Onix. But it levels up here, and because of its high speed, it is able to move first against Brock's Ace. This means I can play around Bide effectively, and Brock uses it early on, allowing Charizard to lower Onix's attack stat by 3 stages. Onix just goes for Bide again, I take his Ace all the way down to -6, and from there the fight's pretty simple. I spam Ember, and eventually the Onix goes down. Despite having a very fast Viridian Forest, Charizard's Brock Split is 2 minutes and 45 seconds. This is significantly slower than Blastoise, but a little bit faster than Venusaur. However, Charizard is now ready to tear its way through the early game. With Ember, I can one-shot all of the Bug Catcher's Pokemon at the beginning of Route 3. This is so satisfying, having just experienced what Venusaur went through. Also, instead of fighting the last, Charizard for the first time in this video can fight the Bug Catcher for slightly more experience. Inside Mount Moon, just like with Blastoise, I'm going to go to the basement floor and pick up the TM for Mega Punch. This is way better than Scratch, although Scratch already was an upgrade for Charizard over Tackle, which both Venusaur and Blastoise had to deal with. The trainers at the end of Mount Moon with their poison types aren't really an issue for Charizard since Ember is pretty solid here. However, in Cerulean City, unlike Blastoise and Venusaur, there is no upside for Charizard fighting Misty right away. Instead, it's only logical to take on the rival next. Of the three starters, Charizard is definitely middle of the road here. It has to take its time knocking out the Spearow as well as the Sandshrew, exposing it to sand attack risk. Well, unless I just get a critical hit and I one-shot, perfect. So beyond that, I'm going to win now because I have special attacks and the Rattata is not that strong, although I do two-shot, and then I miss Mega Punch on the Eevee, slowing things down. Charizard might not be fast here like Blastoise, but it's definitely not as slow or painful as Venusaur, and that just continues to be evident on Route 24. I can one-shot the bugs here. I'm not really worried about the poison types like Venusaur was, but there is some downside if these Pidgeys are able to use Sand Attack. Playing with Charizard feels like Venusaur, but reversed. Venusaur is incredibly strong against all of the major battles, Brock, Misty, and Surge, whereas Charizard is actually kind of bad against all of the major battles. Brock, Misty, and Surge all have type advantages against it. However, it's incredible against all of the random trainers in between the major battles. And here's the thing about solo challenges. There are way more random NPCs than there are gym leaders. So having a bad matchup against a gym leader is not necessarily the worst thing in the world, provided that Charizard doesn't take too many resets. So for the early game, Charizard has a much higher ceiling than Venusaur does. For Misty, I have three options with Charizard. Battle her right away with my current moveset and rely on Mega Punch. This seems like a bad option. Fight the Rocket outside of Cerulean City, get Dig, and then fight Misty with a base 100 power move. This seems much better, and then take the most conservative approach of the three. Go all the way to the SSN, pick up Body Slam, fight the rival, gain more levels, and then come back to Misty and fight her with better moves as well as better damage. The problem with option number 3 is that it does waste some time to backtracking, since at some point during the playthrough I'm going to have to walk back to Surge. For this reason, I went with the middle of the road approach, fighting the Rocket, getting the TM for Dig, and then taking on Misty just before level 24. The worst case scenario here for Charizard is that Misty goes for X Defend and then survives my hit with Dig on the Staryu. This will allow it to hit once with Water Gun, doing some damage to Charizard, but she doesn't do this, instead choosing Water Gun, and I one-shot. This levels Charizard to 24 before the Starmie comes in. I go for Dig right away. Misty uses an X Defend, which is not ideal. Dig hits, doing roughly 1/3 in damage, and then the Starmie strikes with Bubble Beam. This does about the same amount to Charizard as I did with Dig, which is encouraging at least. What I'm most worried about though is the Starmie getting a critical hit with Bubble Beam. It rolls the powerful move again when I'm above ground for the second time. Luckily, it does not get a critical hit. Charizard survives with 10 hit points and finishes Misty with a third Dig. Okay, so no resets for the fire type. Now let's talk about Sandy. With Mega Punch, I can one-shot all of her Pidgey. There is some downside here. If I miss, I could potentially get stuck with Sand Attack, but overall this feels so much better than with Venusaur. On the SSN, I go and pick up Rest. This move might be required for Charizard. Unfortunately, Lance's Gyarados is very threatening, and having Rest for that fight can be incredibly helpful for fire types. Of the 3 Pokemon today, I think that Charizard is most likely to run this move in its final playthrough. Body Slam is a great upgrade for Mega Punch, then I take on the rival. He's incredibly easy for Charizard, and with him out of the way, there is only one more battle in the early game. It's Lieutenant Surge, who, as we have already seen, does not have good AI, so he doesn't know he should be using Thunderbolt against Charizard. I also have Dig, and I am faster than the Raichu, so Charizard's speed is actually a benefit here once again, because using Dig, I go underground on the turn that Raichu uses Thunderbolt. Then Dig gets a critical hit, and Surge's only Pokemon faints. Charizard gets a third split of 13 minutes and 28 seconds. Right now, Blastoise is in first place, Charizard is in second, and Venusaur is in third. But a lot of the dynamics between these Pokemon are going to fundamentally start changing in the mid-game, because all 3 of these Pokemon get major moveset upgrades just around the corner. Unfortunately, Charizard is going to have to wait the longest, but it still has all the tools it needs to deal with everything in the Rock Tunnel Gauntlet. Ember's able to one-shot all of the Wrapping Lass's Pokemon so that I don't fear Stun Spore and Wrap here. The Cubone and Slowpoke just inside of Rock Tunnel are kind of annoying, but I do burn the Cubone so it does less damage when it attacks. Slowpoke takes 2 hits from Body Slam. Next is the Self-Destructing Hiker, and he does have rock moves. However, Charizard is one-shotting all of his Pokemon with Dig, so I never give him a chance, and even the Graveler goes down to a single hit from the Ground-type move, so he never has a chance to use his Rock-type moves. Inside Celadon City, I decided to go to the hideout with Charizard. I wanted to pick up the extra rare candy. I think of the 3 starters, it is the one that's going to need levels the most. Inside the department store, I purchased myself Calcium, improving Charizard's special. This will both increase its damage with Flamethrower and Fire Blast, but also shore it up against water moves like Gyarados' Hydro Pump. I don't have much to say about the rival in Pokemon Tower. This fight is slower than I would have liked with Charizard, and I do also want to mention that the Fearow can go for Mirror Move, so using Body Slam on turn 1 is never really a great idea since it can paralyze your Pokemon. So for that reason, I knock his lead out with Ember. From there, the rest of his Pokemon just sort of fall apart to Charizard, and the same is true for all of the Chandler in the tower. Dig is able to easily one-shot every single ghost here. Clearing Pokemon Tower before fighting Erica might seem like a mistake to you, but it really isn't. Charizard needs access to Sylph as soon as possible. I make my way directly to the 5th floor, fight the mandatory Arbok trainer, and then grab the card key. On this same floor, I can backtrack through the teleport pad up towards the room where the protein is. I'm going to pick this up on my way with Charizard since I think it will help. After all, the next item that I'm going to be picking up is Swords Dance. If I go all the way to the right-hand side of this floor, I can go through another teleport pad, dodge the guy with Sandshrew and Sandslash, and then pick up this powerful move. I wanted to ensure that I had every rare candy for this playthrough, so I'm also going to get the Machoke candy on the 10th floor. To do this, I can simply unlock the door north of Swords Dance and walk up 3 more flights of stairs. Fighting this one optional trainer gives me access to both a rare candy as well as the TM for Earthquake, which is going to save time, roughly 2/3 of a second every time I use it in comparison with Dig. I teach Swords Dance in the place of Scratch and then Earthquake over Dig. With these major upgrades for Charizard, I'm now going to head back to Celadon City and face Erica. This fight would have been significantly slower with the potential to really slow down in the case that Weepinbell or Gloom went for Sleep Powder, but now I can just set up Swords Dance against the Tangela and one-shot every single one of her team members. Next is Cycling Road, and here I'm going to battle some optional trainers, the Weezing duo as well as the Biker Boss. Earthquake makes these battles much quicker than they otherwise would have been, and I continue my optional training inside the Fuchsia City Gym, taking on both optional tamers. With them out of the way, I fight the one last mandatory juggler. This brings Charizard up to level 39, close to level 40, but if you look at my speed, I'm pretty sure that this is going to be perfect for Koga. Prior to this fight, Charizard was poisoned. In some cases, this is helpful if you're using a water type, for example, but in this case, the Venonats are never going to choose Sleep Powder, so it's not really helping me here. It's actually hindering Charizard's progress because I am losing health. I set up with 2 turns of Swords Dance to +4, and then my special gets dropped by Psychic, but I think with +4, I should have enough damage to one-shot at least all of the Venonats and probably the Venomoth. But on the second Venonat, I get a critical hit, which reduces Charizard's damage, although I do paralyze the Venonat and then Koga just uses an X attack, so he's being completely impotent anyways. I knock it out, move on to the third one, which Charizard doesn't critical hit, and that leaves only Venomoth. From the start of this fight, I had enough speed to move first against it, but I just leveled up to 40 over a damage rounding threshold. Now, when you level up, you do lose badge boosts, but you don't lose intended boosts, so Swords Dance is still doing its job. I go for Earthquake, which is slightly more powerful than Body Slam, and as a result, I'm able to one-shot the Venomoth and take an easy win against Koga. Charizard gets a 5th gym split of 27 minutes and 7 seconds. In this section of the game with Blastoise, it initially seems like things are going to be worse. After all, the Wrapping Lass is the first trainer of the Rock Tunnel Gauntlet. That said, I have Dig, which is powerful enough to one-shot both of her Oddish, and then Body Slam can be used against the Bellsprout to be slightly more turn efficient. Inside the tunnel, I one-shot the Cubone, but I have to slow myself down against the Slowpoke using Dig twice to 2-shot. The Status Condition Junior trainer can be annoying. Usually her Pokemon Pokemon survive where the wrapping lasses didn't. Or at least they have a chance to survive, and that appears to be the case with this Oddish. It holds on with a tiny sliver of health. The worst possible thing it can do is go for Sleep Powder, which is going to take so much time away from Blastoise. Luckily it goes for Poison Powder instead. I finish it, move on to the Bulbasaur, and this one is usually a one-shot if the Oddish was close, which is the case here. Okay, so that's it for Rock Tunnel. In Celadon City, I'm going to skip the hideout because I don't think Blastoise needs the extra candy. On the top floor of the department store, I pick up fresh water so that I can get myself the Ice Beam TM. I assume that this is going to be useful for Blastoise, probably in the mid-game. I also purchase calcium to improve Blastoise's special. Just like with Charizard, Blastoise has to be a little bit concerned about Mirror Move and status conditions at the beginning of Rival 4. However, in this case, the Furo is unable to survive Ice Beam. From there, the rest of the Rival's Pokemon are really easy to knock out. I will take the time though during this fight to talk about Withdraw. I have to give up one of my current moves, Bubble Beam, Body Slam, Dig, or Ice Beam. And I think in this case, it makes most sense to drop Body Slam right now. Bubble Beam is still more powerful than Ice Beam, and Dig is my physical move. Plus, in terms of coverage, ground type moves are really good, especially when the rest of the tower is filled with a bunch of weak Ghastly, and Dig is definitely the solution here. The paths of the two starters are going to diverge now. Instead of going to Sylph and getting Swords Dance, Blastoise cannot learn Swords Dance, so it's going to go to Cycling Road next and do some training. It'll fight the same two people that Charizard did. The only difference now is that I'm using Dig against them, so these battles are slightly slower. Okay, in the Safari Zone, we should ask the number one question for water types. Is this going to be a water type that likes to use Surf, or is it going to be a water type that sticks with Bubble Beam and Hydro Pump? In the case of Blastoise, I don't think it makes any sense to skip Surf. Its move pool is not diverse enough that it's going to run into the same constraints that a Pokemon like Lapras or Starmie does. So today, I am going to teach Blastoise Surf in the place of Bubble Beam. I take on Erica next. Blastoise is level 35 by this point, and with Ice Beam, I think that my damage ranges will be good enough here. Although I fail to one-shot the Tangela, it goes for Vine Whip, doing pretty good damage, and then I knock it out. I have just above half health remaining for her final two Pokemon. I am unable to one-shot the Weepinbell. It goes for Stun Spore, but just misses, and I knock it out for free. Okay, so far I'm getting really lucky here. Gloom comes in, I go for Ice Beam, I don't knock it out, the Gloom uses Petal Dance. This does a lot of damage, but not enough, and Blastoise pulls through with the win. I think for the follow-up playthrough, I should be delaying Erica. In Sylph, let's talk about the tension between Earthquake and Dig. If I teach Earthquake now, then I can no longer use Dig as a field move, and Dig is really helpful as a field move. It allows me to escape 4 locations: Sylph, Pokemon Mansion, Blaine's Gym, and Sabrina's Gym. Now there is a way to play around this. If I purchased escape ropes at the marts earlier into the game, then I could use them instead of Dig and teach Earthquake right now, saving time during battles. But this is a first playthrough, and I'll admittedly say I'm not playing as well as I could be. So without escape ropes, holding on to Dig right now makes the most sense. I don't want to backtrack for escape ropes, that will waste more time. After all, I only lose about 2/3 of a second every time I choose Dig during battle. And Blastoise isn't going to be spamming this move. The rival in Sylph is next. Maybe here we should talk about badge boosts. I can go for them against the Sandslash, but I don't think that that's the right choice. Instead, I can one-shot it with Surf and avoid things like Poison from Poison Sting or Sand Attack dropping my accuracy. Then against Cloyster, I can set up with Withdraw. The reason I like to do this is because the Cloyster's only move it can choose against water types is Supersonic. Whenever your Pokemon deals self-inflicted damage to itself with Confusion, it calculates damage based on your Pokemon's current attack stat and its current defense stat. So if I raise my defense with Withdraw, then Confusion's damage gets lowered turn after turn. Supersonic is also really inaccurate, so the Cloyster can just keep missing over and over again with its move and let me set up for free. Right now I have 4 badges and only 2 of them boost my stats. The Boulder badge boosts attack and the Thunder badge boosts defense despite what Surge says in game. Whenever I use Withdraw, it correctly recalculates my defense stat and then applies 1 badge boost on top of it. If I was to say badge boost my defense with a different move like Growth, then if I used Withdraw after Growth, it would correctly remove all of the compounding badge boosts from my defense stat and only apply the intended badge boost after the stage modifiers. However, with my attack stat, whenever I use Withdraw, it compounds the boosts on attack over and over again, slowly making this stat better and better. The only way that I lose these boosts during battle is if my attack stat gets recalculated by a different move. Say the enemy has Growl and they use it, then I would lose all of these compounded boosts. And another way I could lose the boosts is by leveling up, because then the game recalculates all of my stats successfully. In the case of Rival 5, this isn't an issue for Blastoise. I retain my badge boosts for the Magneton one-shotting, and this is really exactly what I wanted to ensure. Kadabra's next. It has one more speed than Blastoise, which is annoying, but I obliterate it with a follow-up dig. Then I level up, losing my badge boosts in my attack stat, but I don't think I need them since Flareon is last. Now, it does have ridiculously good special, so I didn't want to go for Surf, instead choosing Dig. This doesn't have enough damage to one-shot, so maybe I did want my badge boosts here. Luckily, the Flareon can't really do anything to Blastoise other than Sand Attack, and it doesn't even choose the move. I knock it out with Surf and defeat the rival. Giovanni is really bad against Blastoise, that's all there is to say here. Now, with him defeated, I should have picked up Mimic because this move is really good against Koga with water types. However, I didn't do this, I just went to Koga's gym kind of without a plan. I guess I was hoping that Blastoise would just do enough damage with Surf. It's only level 41 after it finishes the mandatory trainers. This isn't going to be enough. The reason that Mimic is really powerful against Koga is because you can steal either Sleep Powder or Psychic. Then, once you wake up from sleep, because Koga is going to go for sleep on turn 1, unless his AI replaces the move with an X attack. Then you can sweep his team, either putting his Pokemon each to sleep or knocking them out with Psychic. I think for Blastoise, mimicking Psychic makes a lot of sense. You know what doesn't make sense? Just spamming Surf and hoping that I one-shot these Pokemon. I can't even finish off the first Venonat, so it's able to get in a Psychic. Luckily, it doesn't drop my special. Then I critical hit the second Venonat, the third one comes in. This one doesn't get crit, but it does get an X attack, so it doesn't go for Sleep Powder, and then I knock it out. Okay, is Blastoise gonna pull this off? I think it's going to. Venomoth comes in, it uses Double Team. Okay, I'm probably just gonna miss like 5 times in a row and lose now. However, Blastoise doesn't. I do a third, Venomoth uses Toxic, Surf does another third, Venomoth uses Leech Life, doing almost nothing, and Surf for a third time in a row against the Venomoth hits and knocks it out. Blastoise gets a Koga split of 27 minutes and 23 seconds. But this isn't really a fair comparison with Charizard's time, since Blastoise beat the rival in Sylph, but Charizard didn't. But before continuing with Blastoise, let's examine Venusaur's route through this section of the game. Now, I have been very hard on my favorite starter during the first portions of this run because things have been brutal up until now. But for Venusaur, things really do get better in the next section of the game. Against the Wrapping Lass, I wasn't sure about my damage ranges here, but I critical hit her first 2 Pokemon. Then the second Oddish gets knocked out in one hit with Body Slam, so apparently Venusaur has the damage ranges it needs here for success. Okay, there's some annoying bugs here. Venonat is able to survive, and it could mess Venusaur up with Supersonic or Confusion. It would be nice if I could fight this trainer at a slightly higher level. More on that later. Inside Rock Tunnel, the Pokemaniac is really easy to defeat. I one-shot the Cubone, and I two-shot the Slowpoke. The Status Condition Junior Trainer could be annoying, but in this case, I'm able to two-shot both of her Pokemon, so that's good enough for Venusaur. Of course, Vine Whip one-shots all of the self-destructing Hiker's team, getting Venusaur to level 30, and here it can learn Razor Leaf. This move will get critical hits 255 out of 256 times when used by Venusaur. You should know that unlike in future games, the critical hit modifier in Generation 1 is not 2, it is dynamically calculated based on the Pokemon's current level. Because Razor Leaf is going to have essentially guaranteed critical hits, I will be calculating its effective power using the exact critical hit modifier for Venusaur at its current level. You can see right now that Razor Leaf has an effective power of 153, and if you watch this as I level up, this effective power is also going to slowly get higher and higher. This move is honestly fantastic for grass types in Generation 1. Its only downside is the accuracy. It has a 5% chance to miss. I do also want to mention that it has 25 PP. This makes absolutely no sense. I am convinced that Vine Whip and Absorb had their PP quantities mixed up. And maybe Vine Whip was supposed to have 25, Razor Leaf 20, and then Absorb 10. I don't know. That would be most similar to Mega Drain. Maybe Vine Whip and Razor Leaf had their PPs mixed up. You know, that seems also pretty likely. With Venusaur in Celadon City, I'm going to skip the Rocket Hideout. I don't need the rare candy. I am 100% certain of that. From here on out, Venusaur is kind of going to be locked into minimum battles. I don't really need more experience to have success. Inside the department store, I pick up 2 Carbos because I want to make sure that Venusaur is going to be moving first against key targets. The rival in Pokemon Tower is maybe the scariest against Venusaur, just because his Fearow is always going to choose Mirror Move, and Body Slam is really my only good move against it. Although with constant critical hits from Razor Leaf, its effective power is just shy of Body Slams, so I think I should have used the Grass move here instead of the normal move. Luckily, Venusaur doesn't get paralyzed, and then I sweep through the rest of his team. Venusaur, unlike the other 2 starters, does not get access to a ground type move. Because of this, it's going to struggle against the Chandler in Pokemon Tower. There is a chance that I lose here. I could get paralyzed by Lick, confused by Confuse Ray, high, and Nightshade always does a lot of damage at this section of the game. Luckily with Razor Leaf constantly getting critical hits, it is able to two-shot both of Agatha Jr.'s Ghastly. Like with Charizard, heading to Sylph after Pokemon Tower makes the most sense for Venusaur. Getting Swords Dance now in the place of Leech Seed is a major moveset upgrade, and then I can use it to crush Erica. Set up on the Tangela, crush everything else with Body Slam. At this point, we should kind of talk about Venusaur's track for this game. It is essentially on rails for the rest of the playthrough. It needs Body Slam, a physical move, to pair with Swords Dance. It needs Razor Leaf to do damage to water types and ice types, specifically on Lorelei's team. And while Vine Whip is still on my set, it can help in some cases where it does enough damage to one-shot, and then I can get around the accuracy of Razor Leaf. But eventually Vine Whip is going to be switched out for Sleep Powder, although that's going to be in quite some time. When I finish Erica, I'm only level 35, which is 20 levels away from the sleep-inducing move. On Cycling Road, Venusaur mirrors the other two starters, and then it heads into Koga's gym. I didn't fight anyone additional here, and I went up against the 5th gym leader with only level 38. My hope here was I could set up Swords Dance enough and then one-shot everything with Body Slam. Part of this ends up being easy, and part of this ends up being difficult. Number 1, the Venonat can just spam Toxic against Venusaur because they see that Toxic is super effective against the Grass type, and they don't check the Poison-Poison interaction. If they keep going for this move or an X attack, then I can set up for free. But if they go for Psychic, they can drop my special, making me more vulnerable to future Psychics. I set up to +4, took one Psychic, had my special intact, and I decided to sweep from here. I one-shot the first Venonat, the second Venonat, as well as the third. Then Venomoth comes in. It is faster than Venusaur right now, and it goes for Psychic, but I was pretty sure I would survive this. However, Venomoth gets a critical hit and Venusaur faints. Okay, that's my first reset of this run. I tried again. This time though, the Venonat just keeps spamming Psychic, doing tons of damage to Venusaur, and then I get a critical hit bypassing all of my beneficial stat changes. I'm unable to one-shot, it hits another Psychic, bringing Venusaur down to 16 hit points before I even knock out Koga's first Pokemon. If I get a critical hit from here, I'm going to lose, and Venomoth should just win unless it chooses Toxic, which is an option. So I decided to play the fight out and see if maybe I could win because of luck. And the answer is no, I can't. It goes for Leech Life instead, which is 4 times damage, and Venusaur faints. So what does it take to win here? Well, if I have enough health after the Venonats, meaning he just chooses X attack or Toxic, then I can survive Leech Life, go for Body Slam off of +6, and one-shot the Venomoth. Venusaur gets a Koga split of 28 minutes and 29 seconds. While the starters have gone on diverging paths up until now in the mid-game, these results are still quite close to each other. But Venusaur is definitely lagging behind. And that's a bit disappointing for me because the next section of the game is not going to be kind to it. In preparation for this, I fought Psyche on my way to Cinnabar Island to do a little bit of additional training. I went back to Sylph after this at level 40. This battle's really easy for Venusaur because the Sandslash is locked into Poison Sting because of its AI. This gives me a free chance to set up Swords Dance all the way to +6. From there, the remaining Pokemon on his team just aren't strong against Venusaur, and I can one-hit everything, provided I don't get critical hits. And of course, I do get one against the Flareon at the end of the battle. Luckily, it doesn't have good fire-type moves, only Ember and Fire Spin. Oh wait, the best fire move in the game. I'm so scared. No, it just uses Ember. Venusaur is fine. Giovanni is almost identical to Rival 5 because his Nidorino is locked into Poison Sting, so I can set up here with Swords Dance and then crush his entire team. While I show you this easy battle, let's talk about the difficult battles coming up. We have Sabrina, who is super effective against Venusaur, and then we have Blaine, who is super effective against Venusaur. Like I said, Blaine is one of the best gym leaders in Pokemon Yellow. Because we are so close to the end of this series, I'm going to have to do a ranking of all of the major battles in the game, and I think that Blaine is going to be in the S tier. He is so scary for so many Pokemon. Sometimes in these solo challenges, fighting him first before Sabrina makes sense, because then you get the special boost, which helps against the Psychic type specialist. But in this case with Venusaur, I don't think that that's what I want to do, since Blaine is going to be terrifying. And Sabrina often falls apart in these solo challenges because she doesn't have good AI in Pokemon Yellow. Before her though, I'm going to stop by Copycat's house to pick up Mimic. This is very important for grass types in Yellow. Okay, now time for Sabrina. Hopefully Venusaur is going to be able to pull this off. Good news number 1, we have Body Slam and we outspeed the Abra at the beginning of the fight. By the way, if you look at the right hand side of the screen, you might have noticed that before the battle starts, it says that her Abra outspeeds Venusaur, and then once I send in my Venusaur, it says that I outspeed the Abra. This is because internally the game is calculating the badge boosts at this moment, whereas in the bottom left, the overlay is calculating in the badge boosts even when I'm in the overworld. This is so I can predict battles better, but it also makes things easier for all of you to track. It's just an oversight that I'm dealing with the speed on the right hand side of the screen in a slightly different way. I did catch that after playing these first initial playthroughs with the starters, so for the follow-up playthroughs you should see that the speed comparisons are correctly calculated from the start of the battle. While I can knock out the Abra right away, the Kadabra is a little bit different. I went for Swords Dance here to badge boost my speed. I was hoping this would give me enough to move first against the Alakazam, but of course it's not going to. I need 2 turns of setup in order to pull that off. This gives Kadabra time to attack twice. It uses Psychic, doing massive damage, almost enough to one-shot Venusaur. It also drops my special. This badge boosts me again, but I was already faster than the Alakazam after going for my second Swords Dance. The problem is I didn't plan out my experience well here. I level up losing my badge boost. Venusaur has a chance to learn Growth. It's a little bit seductive in Generation 1 since it's boosting both an offensive and a defensive stat, but I'm gonna say no to it because Swords Dance is better. Alakazam comes in, goes for Psywave, a move that sometimes does 1 damage, but in this case it does enough. So Venusaur faints and I have to try Sabrina again. I don't think that I'm gonna be stuck here for very long. Maybe the correct approach, since I'm not gonna badge boost my speed for the Alakazam, is just 1 Swords Dance on the Kadabra, knock it out, move on to the Alakazam and underspeed. By the way, in this case, I decided against not teaching Growth and I did put it in the place of Vine Whip. This could potentially make Blaine easier. Alakazam this time around just gets an X defend on turn 1, Body Slam still does massive damage, then Alakazam goes for a Reflect, but a second turn of defensive setup is still not enough for it to survive my follow-up hit. So Sabrina's defeated, and as predicted, she was unable to wall Venusaur. Okay, why is Blaine scary in yellow? Well, first of all, he is never going to use super potions at full health like he did in red and blue. He still has super potions, but he is very unlikely to use them in yellow. It is truly a rare event whenever he uses one. Unlike in red and blue, all of his Pokemon are much higher levels. Unlike in red and blue, he does not have 2 first stage Pokemon. He has 3 fully evolved Pokemon. And unlike in red and blue, his Pokemon actually have really good moves. Ninetales has Flamethrower, Rapidash has Fire Spin, Arcanine has Flamethrower and Fire Blast. The Rapidash does have Stomp, which is pretty good, and it can flinch if you're not faster than it. Right now, Venusaur isn't. And the Arcanine hits pretty hard with Takedown. It is not uncommon for water types that are using Surf to lose this battle against Blaine, so with Venusaur at level 43, I'm pretty scared. Ninetales is first, and as you can see, I am faster than only this Pokemon. So I need to go for 1 turn of Swords Dance or Growth to badge boost my speed. But my level is also unfortunate. I think I'm going to level up before the Arcanine. My solution here is to go for Growth to boost my special so that I take less damage from his Fire-type moves. The problem is, Ninetales right away goes for Flamethrower, gets a critical hit, and one-shots Venusaur. One thing to remember is that Blaine in Yellow version does not have good AI. This provides Grass types a method to beat him just by getting lucky. Ninetales can spam Tail Whip and Quick Attack, Rapidash could say go for Growl over and over again or miss with Fire Spin, and Arcanine can just mindlessly go for Reflect until the player wins. Or the Ninetales can choose Flamethrower, burn you, having your attack. I set up Swords Dance again to get rid of the burn debuff. This is how it works in Generation 1. However, then Ninetales uses Tail Whip, which recalculates the burn debuff, lowering my attack. But I still come out of this ahead of where I was previously. Unfortunately, it is still not enough to one-shot his lead. Ninetales goes for Flamethrower, and Venusaur loses for a second time. Confuse Ray, followed by Flamethrower. That is another loss. And this repeats in the next battle. Things were starting to feel really bad here. I'm trying the Growth followed by Swords Dance strategy, but it just really isn't working out for me. In this case, I'm finally able to get set up to +6, knock out the Ninetales, move on to the Rapidash. Body Slam then crits. I get hit by Takedown, which does a decent amount of damage, leaving Venusaur on orange for the Arcanine. I level up here, and while I do lose my badge badge boosts, Venusaur's speed stat is 117, 1 point higher than Arcanine. It looks like I perfectly planned that out, but I didn't. I go for Body Slam with +6. It doesn't one-shot Arcanine, the fire type chooses Fire Blast, and Venusaur faints again. Okay, I think there's only one sensible solution, which I have been stubbornly refusing to resort to, using rare candies. I'm pretty far into the game, and it makes sense to burn them now. I have a total of 9 in my bag, so I can bring Venusaur from level 43 up to 52 before trying Blaine again. Turn 1, Growth, Quick Attack. Turn 2, Swords Dance, Confuse Ray. Alright, not ideal. Turn 3, Venusaur does not hit itself in confusion, sets up to +4. Ninetales goes for Flamethrower, which doesn't do that much in this case because of my growth setup. Because I'm a higher level, I wanted to attack now, and I'm able to knock out the Ninetales with only +4. Rapidash is next. As I said, this Pokemon's not as good. I could have squeezed in one more Swords Dance here. It is by far Blaine's worst Pokemon, and if it chose to go for Growl, I wouldn't really care. But instead I went for Body Slam, and I do knock out. But what about the Arcanine? So Body Slam at level 52 with +4 is not enough. Arcanine goes for Flamethrower, but Venusaur survives on orange health and finishes Blaine. This was by far the most brutal battle that I've had in this entire video. As I said, Blaine is pretty good. But you know who's going to be pretty bad against Venusaur? Giovanni. Because I used all my rare candies prior to Blaine, I am now faster than every single one of Giovanni's Pokemon, so I can just use Razor Leaf to dispatch the Dugtrio. Then for Persian, I can set up Swords Dance. It's probably just going to go for Double Team and Screech and maybe Fury Swipes. If it uses Slash, I will need to attack since it always gets crits with that move, and it also has the same type attack bonus. However, it never does direct damage. I just get set up to +6 and then one-shot with Body Slam. From here, Body Slam Nidoqueen, Body Slam Nidoking, and then use Razor Leaf to finish off the Rhydon. We're going to continue with easy battles for Venusaur because the rival has Sandslash, which is still locked into Poison Sting. I can set up Swords Dance for free all the way to +6 and then crush his entire team. During this battle, Venusaur levels up to 55, so I teach it Sleep Powder in the place of Growth. This happens right before Kadabra comes in, but I can one-shot with Body Slam even if I get a crit. The Pokemon I'm worried about is the Flareon. If I do crit and it survives, it could go for Flamethrower, but it could also use Fire Spin or Smog, so I really don't need to be that worried about it. Venusaur does not crit, so I easily one-shot, and now the Grass-type starter is ready for the Elite Four. Back to Charizard. It still hasn't learned Flamethrower by the time it's back to fighting Rival 5 in Sylph at level 40. This battle isn't the worst. I can set up Swords Dance here on the Sandslash, but I do risk getting poisoned or getting hit by Sand Attack. Turn 1 I'm poisoned, which isn't the worst thing in the world because in Generation 1 when you one-shot the opponent's Pokemon, you do not take poison damage. So I'm really only going to take chip damage from this at the beginning of the fight. Then, once I reach +6, I can one-shot Sandslash using Earthquake and move on to the Cloyster. I'm going to continue using physical moves here even though it has outrageous physical defense, and Earthquake is able to get the job done. Magneton, Kadabra, and Flareon also all just fall apart to Earthquake. Nothing to say for Giovanni. Earthquake and Swords Dance here with Charizard are incredibly strong. Sabrina's next, and this one's different than with Venusaur. I can one-shot the Abra, and my speed is so close to Alakazam's that only one turn of Swords Dance is ever needed. It makes most sense to set this up on Kadabra because it is least likely to lower your accuracy, but today it goes for Kinesis anyway. Luckily, I don't miss, so I one-shot the Kadabra, and then I outspeed the Alakazam, and I one-shot with Earthquake. Kinesis was useless, Sabrina is defeated. Next is Blaine, and Charizard does need to be a little bit concerned here. Confuse Ray from the Ninetales could completely mess me up if I'm setting up with Swords Dance, especially because Confuse Ray paired with Tail Whip and Swords Dance is very devastating. I didn't want to push my luck, and I thought that one turn of Swords Dance plus a badge boost from Tail Whip would be enough to one-shot all of his Pokemon. Earthquake takes care of Ninetales as well as Rapidash, but what about Arcanine? It is by far the bulkiest Pokemon he has. Well, Earthquake is able to pull it off, so Charizard has defeated Blaine. Now, there is one gym leader left. Giovanni is notoriously difficult for fire types, but that isn't really the case for Charizard. With other fire types, we were scared of Earthquake during this battle, but with Charizard, we don't need to be worried about that. Also, with Moltres, we don't get access to Swords Dance, and we also don't get access to Earthquake, so that combo isn't available to us. With Charizard's flying type, it can kind of just set up Swords Swords Dance on Dugtrio and then sweep the rest of Giovanni's team using Earthquake. The only downside here is if we constantly get hit by Sand Attack, and in this case I do, to -4 accuracy. I think at this point I should have just given up, reset, and tried again, but no, I tried to play this out. And there are a lot of threats for Charizard along the way, like getting hit by Nidoking's Thunder over and over. Actually, 3 times in total. Charizard gets taken to 6 hit points, then it crits the Nidoking, bringing it to red health, although the 4th Thunder misses and I knock it out, moving on to the Rhydon. So I should one-hit, but I miss, unfortunately, and then Rhydon goes for Rock Slide and Charizard faints. This ends up being my first reset in the playthrough, because of Sand Attack. Anyways, in the next battle, the Dugtrio just uses moves like Dig. It does absolutely nothing to Charizard. I set up to +4 and then knock it out. Persian, I one-hit with Earthquake, and I thought that maybe this would be enough to one-shot the Rhydon. If I don't and it hits with Rock Slide, I'm pretty sure that Charizard will instantly lose. So does Earthquake with +4 have enough damage? The answer is yes. Rhydon goes down and Charizard moves on to the rival. This one required a little bit of foresight. I went for 1 Swords Dance, then realized I'm going to level up, I think, after the Execute, so I didn't want to push my setup any further to retain badge boosts. I go for Flamethrower, but I don't level up after the Execute, instead leveling up after the Cloyster, which I can't one-shot. Also in Gen 1, Ice moves are neutral against Fire types, so I take super effective damage from this Aurora Beam. Charizard is left with orange health, and then I knock out the Cloyster. I'm not in a great position here with +2, but Earthquake is great against his final 3 Pokemon, so Charizard might still be able to pull this off. I crit the Magneton for a one-shot, I crit the Kadabra, and then Flareon's all that's left. I don't get a crit here, but +2 is enough. This experience levels Charizard up to 49. Now this level is kind of cursed for Victory Road. As you can see here, I use a Repel right after pushing this boulder, and then I run into an Onix because yes, there are level 49 Onix here in the cave. I could use candies now to avoid running into more of these, but I wanted to make sure that Charizard would be at a high level by the end of the game. So instead, I'm going to fight some additional NPCs. The Cool Trainer with Chansey is great for Charizard to fight, although Dugong does take 2 hits to knock out, and Chansey also puts me to sleep, wasting a ton of time. It goes for Double Slap over and over again, wasting even more time. Maybe this wasn't the best trainer to battle. I also fight Victoria Bell, who has 3 grass types. They're easy to finish off. This levels Charizard to 50, and then I use rare candies, boosting the Flaming Lizard up to level 60. Now it's ready for the Elite Four. But we've got to catch up with Blastoise. With Koga out of the way, I'm going to go to Cinnabar Island next. I will be skipping all training on my way there, because I don't think Blastoise needs any more before it takes on Blaine. One thing I should mention is that its speed, even with the boost from Koga's badge, isn't enough to move first against the Ninetales on Blaine's team, so I am still picking up Carbos in the overworld. Interestingly, using 1 boosts my speed by 3 points, so now I have a tie with Blaine's Ninetales. Unfortunately, I lose the tie, get confused, Blastoise hits itself, but then I start badge boosting with Withdraw. This benefits Blastoise in 2 ways. Number 1, higher speed so I can move first against everything. Number 2, higher defense, I will take less damage from Rapidash and Arcanine when they go for physical moves. Surf is not able to one-shot any of Blaine's Pokemon unless I get a critical hit, which I do on the Rapidash. That leaves Arcanine last, I do half damage to it. Look at how much damage Flamethrower does to Blastoise. It brings me to orange health. Now that was a critical hit and Arcanine's not going to get a chance for another attack. So Blastoise pulls through with a win, as we would expect against the Fire-type specialist. With him out of the way, I now have a boost to my special stats, so I'm heading to Sabrina next. Before her, I'm also going to use rare candies, boosting Blastoise up to level 50. For Sabrina, Dig on Abra, Dig on Kadabra, Dig on Alakazam. Alakazam does go for X Defend followed by Reflect while I'm setting up with Dig, so it does pitiful damage when it eventually hits, but following this, the Alakazam just keeps going for Reflect. Blastoise crits with Surf, and Sabrina's Ace faints. Fighting the mandatory trainers in the Viridian City Gym brings Blastoise to level 51. Look at its speed right now, 129, which is slower than both Dugtrio and Persian. I used 2 rare candies, bringing it to level 53 in the hopes that I would outspeed these Pokemon. And Blastoise gets 135 speed, which is honestly close to perfect. I now move first against the Dugtrio, but I am speed tied with the Persian. However, I was most scared of Dugtrio going for something like Fissure or Sand Attack. Now I can one-shot it, then the Persian is not really going to do anything. In this case, I set up a couple withdraws just to badge boost myself a little bit more. I wanted to ensure that I would one-shot both Nidoqueen as well as Nidoking, and Blastoise does, so Giovanni ends up being trivial. For Rival 6, it's always good with a water type to have access to an ice move. One of the most annoying Pokemon on this team is the Execute, which can use Stun Spore. In cases where I don't have an ice move, I just reset if it uses Stun Spore, but in this case I can one-shot with Ice Beam. Then for Cloyster, I can withdraw Badge Boost when it's using Supersonic. I can just keep going for withdraw if I'm confused, wait till confusion wears off, and then knock out the Cloyster using Surf. It has low special, so this ends up being a really good move against it. With Badge Boosts, I am now confident that I can one-shot the Magneton, which was the rival's only other scary Pokemon. Inside Victory Road with Blastoise, I face no additional trainers, so all 3 of the starters are now ready for the Elite Four. Let's see how the end of these first runs go. Lorelei seems like she would be the scariest trainer for Blastoise to go up against, but that isn't really the case. Her Dugong will go for rest on turn 2 because of type effectiveness. Then once it's asleep, I can start badge boosting with withdraw. When it wakes up, I simply use dig, hope that it goes for rest again. In this case it isn't, but it's using other bad moves like Aurora Beam. This would be terrible if it dropped my attack, but it doesn't in this case. And Dugong just keeps going for useless moves here. Essentially everything it has is bad. The only downside Blastoise has is getting an attack drop or a speed drop. Eventually I get set up all the way to +6, I don't have my stats altered by the Dugong, and I can 3-shot using Surf. Cloyster is a 2-shot with Surf, and I have top Mimic in the place of Ice Beam so that I can steal the Slowbro's Amnesia. Setting up my special all the way to +6 maximizes the damage from Surf, and then I use this move to finish off Lorelei's remaining Pokemon. The Lapras is a little bit sketchy because it does get a critical hit with Body Slam, but Blastoise is still able to pull through. So in this case, its high base defense is responsible for this win. I have special moves, so the Hiker just completely falls apart. I have Dig, so Agatha just completely falls apart. But Lance is going to be a little bit more difficult. I need an Ice move before fighting him. I could Mimic Ice Beam, but I don't think it's the best approach here for Blastoise. Instead, I teach Blizzard in the place of Dig, preserving Mimic for the champion. I also use 2 PP ups on Blizzard just to ensure that I have enough uses of it against Lance. I'm going to need to knock out the Gyarados using Blizzard, which takes some time. During this duration, the Gyarados is able to do quite a bit of damage to Blastoise, and I wasn't doing as much with Blizzard as I hoped, so I set up with Withdraw. This also is going to give me the outspeed on the Aerodactyl later into the fight. But the issue here ends up being that I run low on Blizzard by the time I knock out the Gyarados. Then on the first Dragonair, I miss Blizzard, and because of this, Blastoise loses, taking its first reset of the run against the penultimate trainer. The solution here is going for Withdraw right away against the Gyarados. If it uses Leer, then I badge boost myself twice in one turn. If it goes for Dragon Rage, then it isn't inflicting much damage, and if it uses Hyper Beam, then I get 2 turns to badge boost, plus the withdraw before Hyper Beam minimizes the damage Gyarados deals. This ends up being extremely effective. I'm able to knock out the Gyarados in 2 hits because one of them was a crit, and then I don't miss Blizzard against the 2 Dragonairs. This leads to Aerodactyl, which I have badge boosted enough to outspeed, and Surf, because of the same type attack bonus, will deal more damage. Dragonite is last. Of course, Blizzard does 4 times damage, so it makes sense to revert to, and in this case I hit, so Lance is defeated. Venusaur feels very different from Blastoise because Lorelei is first and she's pretty tricky. I have Razor Leaf, which can do a lot of damage, but I also want to set up Swords Dance. I'll do this against Dugong. If I miss, there's the potential it goes for turn 1 takedown and turn 2 rest, and if I hit, then the Dugong is going to sleep for much longer than it would have with rest. At least it's most likely going to. I can set up Swords Dance completely then, use Body Slam for the Dugong, Razor Leaf for the Cloyster, and then Body Slam for everything else. I thought that I was going to win here, but then I crit the Lapras, it survives, goes for Blizzard, and yeah, it does massive damage, but not enough to knock out Venusaur. It also doesn't freeze. Okay, I've won. No, I crit for a second time in a row. Lapras survives. It also gets paralyzed, but it still moves, uses Blizzard again, which hits and Venusaur faints. Obviously, this is eventually just going to work out. I don't crit the Lapras on my second attempt, and that's a win for Venusaur. This guy's easy, but Agatha is not. For this fight, I have taught Mimic in the place of Razor Leaf. This is the go-to grass-type strategy here. I can Mimic Lick, which is super effective against Ghost-type Pokemon, use Sleep Powder, put her Pokemon to sleep, set up with Swords Dance, and then crush them with the physical Ghost move. It's not an extremely consistent strategy since we are relying on Sleep Powder at many points during the battle, and Lick is so weak that it still takes multiple hits to knock out the Ghosts. But it's my only option. I could have run Razor Leaf instead, but I'm just going to use Mimic against Lance, who's right around the corner. Sleep Sleep Powder for Gyarados, Swords Dance to set up, Body Slam to one-shot it and the next Dragonair. Then I could use Sleep Powder on the next Dragonair and mimic Ice Beam, but I decided against it during this battle. I just wanted to see if Body Slam would do enough damage to one-shot the Aerodactyl. It doesn't, but even when Aerodactyl hits with Fly, it only does roughly 1/3 to Venusaur, so I knock it out with a second Body Slam, and then the Dragonite is surviving Body Slams, but Lance uses a Hyper Potion, allows me to roll damage again, and for a second time in a row, the Dragonite survives. This allows it to go for Blizzard, which does massive damage to Venusaur, of course. However, the Grass type lives through it on red health and finishes Lance. Okay, so Charizard against Lorelei. This one's a little bit weird. Swords Dance right away. Aurora Beam lowers my attack, which is annoying, and then Dugong tries to go for Rest, but I wasn't attacking it, so it's unsuccessful in sleeping. With +4, I can knock it out using Earthquake. Then for Cloyster, I have Flamethrower, which is special and does do enough damage. For Slowbro, I go for Earthquake, but it's not enough. Luckily for me, Slowbro chooses Withdraw on turn 1 instead of Surf. Jinx is physically frail, leaving only Lapras. It has Hydro Pump, but with +4, Earthquake is able to do enough damage. Okay, Charizard, well done. It is really impressing me so far in this run. I have Flamethrower for this guy. For Agatha, I just spam Earthquake. I don't even need to set up here with Swords Dance. I guess it would have helped to one-shot the Golbat, but that's the only reason I would have set up, and I would still be turn neutral during this fight. With the Ghost-type specialist out of the way, now I have to take on Lance. When I think about fire types in Yellow version, this is the battle that I am most frustrated with. His Gyarados either requires luck or a ridiculous level for consistency. Lance has good AI, so the Gyarados is always going to go for Hydro Pump. At level 63, after one rare candy, and after badge boosting with Swords Dance twice, this is how much damage Hydro Pump does. Well, that was a critical hit, so Charizard gets one shot. If I don't get hit by a crit, after one turn of Swords Dance, Hydro Pump does more than half to Charizard. I lose for a second time, although I think I reset here slightly too soon. I think the Charizard was about to survive that hit. Anyway, what I'm really looking for here is a Hydro Pump miss on turn 2. Once it misses, I get set up to +4, and then I use Body Slam to one-shot the Gyarados. It has enough damage to one-shot both Dragonairs, and on Aerodactyl, I go for the special move Flamethrower. After all, Body Slam is resisted. I shrug off one hit from Wing Attack, 2-shot, and then for Dragonite, Body Slam is unable to one-hit. This is the reason I picked up Rest on the SS Anne. I could teach it to Charizard in the place of Flamethrower and then use it on one of the Dragonairs to heal up before facing the Aerodactyl and the Dragonite at the end of the battle. After all, Dragonite has super effective Blizzard and Thunder, but it misses, and Charizard wins anyway. Here's how these three Pokemon stack up before the final battle of the run. The rankings are unchanged. Blastoise is in first place by quite a wide margin, Charizard is in second place, and Venusaur is in a distant third place. Yeah, Blaine really messed up this first Venusaur playthrough. And interestingly enough, Venusaur actually has the same game time after Lance that Charizard has. So provided these Pokemon got no resets, and Venusaur still had one blackout, Charizard and Venusaur would be tied at this point, and Blastoise would be in first place. Although if Venusaur got no blackouts, which continue to increment game time, then it would be ahead of Charizard. There's still one more battle though, so anything could happen. Charizard is one of the rare fire types, one of two in Generation 1, that doesn't have an absolutely awful matchup against the champion. Sandslash can't go for its best move Earthquake, and this gives Charizard free time to set up with Swords Dance. The only downside here is that maybe the Sandslash poisons with Poison Sting or deals massive damage with Slash. You can see this here, as I miss with Fire Blast. I taught this move over Flamethrower just to have increased damage against the Sandslash to ensure that Charizard would one-shot after setup. I wanted to minimize the number of turns in battle, just so that Slash wouldn't ruin my day. Alakazam is next, Earthquake one-shots, Executor follows. I go for Body Slam here, get a Generation 1 miss. Executor uses Stomp, bringing Charizard down to red health, and now I think I've lost. I'm pretty sure that I can't one-shot the Executor. Maybe Fire Blast will? Nope, it misses. Executor uses Hypnosis, then follows it up with Barrage, which misses. Okay, Charizard, are you gonna pull out an absolute miracle win here? Executor misses again with Barrage. Charizard continues sleeping, but then Barrage hits 4 times and Charizard faints. Losing to the Executor is not what I thought was going to happen here. In the next battle, I realized that I was leveling up after the Sandslash. I burned my final rare candy before Lance, so I can't change this, but I can set up once against Sandslash, then Fire Blast Blast and one-shot it. Earthquake still has enough damage for the Alakazam, and then I can set up more against the Exeggutor. This preserves some badge boosts for the end of the fight, and I think they're critical for the Cloyster specifically. Fire Blast is able to one-shot the Exeggutor after 2 turns of badge boost. Earthquake takes care of Magneton, so I avoid Thunderbolt. Fire Blast does one-shot the Cloyster, leaving only Flareon. And Earthquake is exceptional against it. With Charizard, I get a first playthrough time of 43 minutes and 14 seconds. With 4 resets, 0 blackouts at level 65, with a game time of 2 hours and 43 minutes. This is a historic finish, by the way. Charizard is a really good fire type, but we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. We have to fight the champion with Venusaur next. Now, the Sandslash does know Earthquake, but it sees this move as not very effective against Venusaur's grass type, so as a result, it is still just going to spam Poison Sting. I wanted to preserve my health, so I went for Sleep Powder, but I could just spam Swords Dance here, mimic Earthquake for free, and then sweep the champion's team. By far at the end of the run, Venusaur has the easiest final battle. With +6, I one-shot Alakazam, I one-shot the Exeggutor, I one-shot Magneton. Cloyster is probably going to survive. It does on red health, so there's a chance that it could crit with Ice Beam or get a freeze. In this case, it gets neither, and the Flareon is easy to finish. In my first run with Venusaur, I get a time of 44 minutes and 58 seconds, with 10 resets, 1 blackout at level 61, with a game time of 2 hours and 43 minutes. Now, unfortunately for Blastoise, it might have come to the champion with the best time, but the champion is by far the most brutal for water types. I have given up Dig, and so I need a solution to the Magneton. The best way to do this is mimicking Earthquake from the Sandslash, but since I want to set up with Withdraw here to ensure I have enough damage to one-shot the Magneton, I also expose myself to the risk of getting hit by Slash. It's a high crit move which will bypass all of my beneficial stat changes and still do a ton of damage to Blastoise, but at least I don't care about its other 3 moves. I set up only once during this fight, and then I knocked out the Sandslash using Surf. My health was low, so I kind of had to do this. Alakazam follows, and with 1 turn of Withdraw, I do not have enough damage from Earthquake to one-shot, so Blastoise loses here. So what I'm hoping for is good setup against the Sandslash, mimic Earthquake, and then knockout. I get to +3 in the next battle, and then I have to proceed with red health. Is this enough to one-shot the Alakazam? It is. Next is Exeggutor. I can use Blizzard here. I don't have enough damage to one-shot, but the Exeggutor is locked into Leech Seed because of type effectiveness. As long as I'm one-shotting everything from here on out, I'll be fine, but Blastoise isn't going to. With +3, I can knock out the Magneton, but Cloyster is going to take at least 2 hits. Surf is still my best move against it, and it's actually going to take 3 turns. Because it's always going to use Spike Cannon and Leech Seed is set up, there is no way for me to win here with Blastoise. I just need to hope that the Sandslash completely drops the ball at the beginning of the battle, and it doesn't 2 more times in a row. But finally, I'm able to get set up all the way to +5 before I knock it out. Maybe this will give me a 2-shot on the Cloyster, or potentially a 1-shot against the Exeggutor. I could also crit with Blizzard, which might get a 1-hit. In this case, I do crit, and it does do enough damage. Magneton falls, Cloyster is next, and with Surf, I am able to 2-shot. But this is only because I avoided Leech Seed from the Exeggutor. My high defense from Withdraw allows me to shrug off the hit from Spike Cannon, and I finish the Cloyster as well as the final Flareon. Blastoise definitely had a disappointing champion, however, it is still able to get the best time of these 3. 41 minutes and 46 seconds, with 5 resets at level 61, with a game time of 2 hours and 36 minutes. Here are the results from playthrough 1. These Pokemon did not change their rankings during the playthrough. Blastoise is number 1, Charizard is number 2, and Venusaur is number 3. Of them, Charizard is the most surprising to me. Jumping over to the tier list, right now, the best ranked fire type that I have played so far is Arcanine, and it's in the B tier. Now, I should mention here that Arcanine is not the best fire type that I have played of all of the fire types that I've run. Ninetales is definitely the best fire type of these, maybe with Flareon being able to give it a run for its money, but I just haven't replayed those two as recently as I have replayed Arcanine. If I filter the results for only fire types, then we get this result, which has the fire types clustered towards the middle tiers. There is no A tier finish and there is no S tier finish, but today with Charizard's first playthrough alone, it is going to get an A tier finish, because it already has secured a time under 45 minutes. And I think for the second run, there just might be a chance to finally get a fire type into the S tier. But first of all, let's do follow-up playthroughs for Blastoise and Venusaur. The one thing about Blastoise's run that surprised me the most coming back to this is just how few turns of withdraw it really needs throughout this entire playthrough. The fact that it needs such minimal badge boosts means it's going to get a really strong finish. Also, minimum battles for Brock, this just makes sense. There is no other way to play this early game. I actually come out of the first split with the same time that I had in my first playthrough. One small detail here, in the Pewter City Mart, I'm going to buy myself escape ropes. This is because with Blastoise, I don't want to hold on to Dig for too long and have to waste time in battle. On Route 3, I fight the Lass, and in Mount Moon, I pick up Mega Punch. I'm just going to use this against Misty. I think it is the superior option over Bide. With Mega Punch, Blastoise has upside for critical hits, and that really does speed up this battle because typically it slows down. Misty uses a ton of Harden and X Defend. In this split, I am 2 seconds faster than my previous run. With Bubble Beam, Route 24, 25, and the trainers on the way to Vermilion City are all incredibly easy. Note here that I'm not doing too many extra heals. I have run out of Bubble Beam PP by the time I make it to the SSN. You would think this is fine because I can keep going with Dig and Body Slam, but in this Blastoise playthrough, I am going to be skipping Body Slam. By the way, this route is from Zealous Pawn, so thank you to him for figuring out that Blastoise just doesn't need this move. Remember in my first run, I ended up deleting it fairly early into the playthrough to have access to other moves, and I kept Dig for physical damage. Yeah, Body Slam doesn't really offer anything that Mega Punch isn't already covering for, and while Mega Punch does have lower accuracy, I really don't need to use it. For the rival, I can mostly rely on Bubble Beam and Dig, and then for Surge, I'm just going to be spamming Dig. By this point in the run, I am now 39 seconds ahead of my former pace, which for the early game is a really solid improvement. In Rock Tunnel, I get slowed down a little bit by the status condition junior trainer. Blastoise's damage ranges here are just not ideal. It has a 63.1% chance to knock out the Oddish and a 93.5% chance to knock out the Bulbasaur. I get paralyzed as a result, and then Blastoise is taken to low health. I do end up winning here, but I want to emphasize in this fight that I am losing time. And in a playthrough with a Pokemon that got close to sub 40 in its first run, this amount of time loss is fairly significant. In Celadon City, I skip the hideout and buy 2 Carbos for Blastoise. Keeping Bubble on my moveset allows me to easily weaken and then catch a Doduo, and I can immediately replace it with Ice Beam. After finishing Pokemon Tower, I go to Sylph to do some extra training. The only optional trainer I have faced in this entire playthrough so far is the Gentleman to get the candy on the SSN, but that's going to change now. I fight the Machoke Rocket on the 10th floor to get access to Earthquake to save time in battle, and then I take on 3 additional trainers: the Reception Rocket, the Stacked Scientist, and the Protein Scientist. Once I defeat the mandatory Arbok trainer with my last PP of Dig, Blastoise levels up to 36. I'll teach Earthquake to replenish my PP, and then use Rare Candies to boost Blastoise up to 41 before facing the rival. This is the first fight in the entire playthrough where I need to use Withdraw, and I only need a single use of the move. Without a single Withdraw at level 41, Earthquake has a 56.5% chance to knock out the Magneton in a single hit, but with Withdraw, I am guaranteed to get the knockout, with a regular hit or with a crit. Now, in doing these follow-up runs, sometimes I get stuck in my muscle memory and I just can't break old habits. In this case, if I have gone to Sylph this early on and fought the rival, typically I don't go to Sabrina next, usually I fight Koga. This caused me to miss Mimic multiple times when using Blastoise, like you saw in the first playthrough. But today I am proud to say that I picked up Mimic before not even going to Koga. Erica is next. At level 43, I can fight the Beauty. I don't need extra training and I don't want to waste time fighting the Cool Trainer who has 3 Pokemon. Instead, I can go through this area on minimum Pokemon, and Blastoise at level 43 can one-shot all of Erica's grass types. Cycling Road is next, and Blastoise is not going to fight a single trainer here. This is a moment where I should emphasize just how efficient this playthrough is. You know that the Pokemon is a rare breed when it's skipping the biker boss. Inside the Fuchsia City Gym, I teach Mimic in the place of Ice Beam. Now for Koga, it's very important to get the turn order correct here. On the first Venonat, I want to use Surf to knock it out right away so that it doesn't use Sleep Powder. Blastoise at level 45 has an 84.8% chance to one-shot this Venonat. But then on the second Venonat, it only has a 39.1% chance to one-shot. But this Venonat does not have Sleep Powder, so I can Mimic Psychic, which gives me a guaranteed one-hit on the following 2 Venonats. And then against the Venomoth, I have a 76.1% chance to two-shot. Also, Blastoise speed ties here. With the water type, Blaine is actually pretty easy, and Sabrina is fine. As you can see here, I don't one-shot the Kadabra. I only have a 30% chance to pull that off with Earthquake, and I could use Withdraw during this fight to slightly boost my damage, but Blastoise levels up right when the Kadabra goes down, and I just don't think that Withdraw Withdraw during this fight is worth it. If I crit the Kadabra or roll extremely good regular damage, then I will knock it out, and I'm gonna two-shot the Alakazam unless I crit. Well, I did crit here, but it was with Surf. I needed to be using a physical move, and I switched to using Surf because Alakazam got a defense boost. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is there's just a lot of upside here for Blastoise to attack all out. And Sabrina is not really a great gym leader in Pokemon Yellow. Inside the Viridian City Gym, fighting mandatory trainers, Blastoise levels up to 48 after the last Pokemon, and then I teach Blizzard in the place of Mimic. Also, before Giovanni, look at Blastoise's speed, 124, but I'm going to use 4 rare candies to boost Blastoise up to 52. Now it has 135 speed. It moves first against Dugtrio and one-shots. Against Persian, I'm going to set up with Withdraw for the second time in the playthrough, and Blastoise only needs a single turn of the move. Without Withdraw, Blastoise has an 80.4% chance to one-shot Nidoqueen and a 71.7% chance to one-shot Nidoking. But with one turn of Withdraw, it has 3 guaranteed one-hits on the final 3 Pokemon. By the way, if you're wondering why I taught Blizzard before Giovanni, but then I never used it against Giovanni, it's just because I had my bag open to use rare candies prior to Giovanni. And I want to have Blizzard for this fight against the rival so that I can one-shot the Execute. Also, this is Blastoise's 3rd use of Withdraw for the playthrough. This badge boost makes Earthquake a guaranteed one-hit, where without it, it would only have an 82.6% chance to one-shot the Magneton. And getting hit by Thunder Wave is just unacceptable. There's also one other benefit here. I have a slightly higher percent chance to knock out the Cloyster in 2 shots using Surf, which saves time and minimizes the number of turns that it's going to go for Supersonic. However, if it hits with Supersonic, I will use more withdraws. As you can see here, this is specifically to stall out the status condition because I don't want to miss an attack against the Magneton, get hit by Thunder Wave, and as a result have the fight spiral out of control. In Victory Road, I pick up the 10th and final rare candy of the run, and as you can see against Lorelei, I have used it before the beginning of this battle. Blastoise just takes its time here. This is the longest setup with Withdraw in the entire run. I am going to go to +6 defense against the Dugong. Then I use Earthquake to knock it out, Surf to knock out the Cloyster, and then Earthquake for the final 3 Pokemon. This is one of the slowest fights in the entire playthrough. It feels very similar to Misty. Starting the league at level 55 gives me a level up after Lapras, and then level ups going into Agatha's Golbat, Lance's first Dragonair, and then after his Dragonite, and into the champion's ace Flareon. I don't really care about mid-battle level ups though. I'm going to use Withdraw to boost my special here against Gyarados. This is so that Blizzard does enough damage that I knock out the Gyarados in 2 hits. I need 2 withdraws to pull this off, then I can one-shot the 2 Dragonair. I don't care if Aerodactyl attacks me. Even if it gets a critical hit with its best move, Hyper Beam, Blastoise still survives. Surf knocks it out, and then Blizzard one-shots the Dragonite. The champion is last. I can set up Withdraw against the Sandslash, then use Surf to knock it out at +3. This ensures that Earthquake one-shots the Magneton later on into the fight. I got a bit lucky here. I froze the Executor so it wasn't able to use Leech Seed. Magneton went down to a single hit, and then I 3-shot the Cloyster. This is where Blastoise can lose. If Cloyster gets a critical hit with Spike Cannon, it'll do decent damage. Also, if it's draining my health with Leech Seed every turn, then there's the potential for Blastoise to get knocked out right before the end of this battle. But today, I do not have the bad luck. Blastoise makes it through this follow-up run with no resets. It gets a time of 36 minutes and 14 seconds. It finished the game at level 60 with a game time of 2 hours and 23 minutes. That is an improvement over the first run of 5 minutes and 32 seconds. I was really happy with this run, so let's move on now to Venusaur. Minimum battles for Brock, Route 3 Lass. It's so annoying playing the early game with Tackle, that's the last time I'm going to mention it. Minimum battles in Mount Moon taking me to Misty at level 18. The rival before Nugget Bridge is the most dangerous major battle of the early game, but still Venusaur's pretty competent here. Unlike Blastoise on the SSN, it cannot skip Body Slam. This is its go-to move, so I have to do one extra battle. Surge got annoying in this playthrough, not because he won, but just because he went for a turn 1 Growl, lowering my physical attack. I had to take 4 shots with Body Slam in order to knock out the Raichu, but it just sat there and did nothing else useful for the remainder of the battle. One advantage of grass types in the early game in Pokemon Yellow is that you can use rare candies quite early into the run, and after Surge, I have reached level 27. I'm going to use 2 rare candies here to boost Venusaur to 29, so that I have guaranteed one-shots with Body Slam against all of the Rapping Lass's Pokemon. In Celadon City, 2 Carbos to improve Venusaur's speed. Complete Pokemon Tower next, so that I can head to Sylph to do training. The Machoke Rocket, the Arbok Rocket, followed by the Sandslash Rocket on my way to get Swords Dance. This is the second last battle of the 4 that I'm going to complete here before the rival. I did this one first so that I would have Swords Dance against the Protein Scientist. This ensures that after 2 turns of setup, I sweep his team with a series of 1-hits. With him out of the way, Venusaur gets to level 36. I use a single rare candy, bringing it to level 37, and then I face the rival. rival. He's easy, set up on the Sandslash, and then sweep his team. You might think the 1 rare candy here is so that I can outspeed the Kadabra, but I would have outsped it anyways, so it's not for that purpose. Instead, it synergizes with what comes next in the route. Inside Erica's gym, I fight the Cool Trainer for additional experience. Then on Cycling Road, I take on the Biker boss. After the mandatory trainers inside of Koga's gym, Venusaur perfectly levels up to 43. However, if I hadn't used the rare candy, I would have leveled up prior to the Hypno and wasted some experience using candies before Koga. Because I am going to use 3 candies now to boost Venusaur up to level 46 before taking on the Poison type specialist. There's a little bit of a choice here. You could use 1 use of Swords Dance and then sweep his team, or you can use 2, which guarantees the one-shot on the Venomoth. I think 2 uses of Swords Dance is vastly superior because the Venonat is so unlikely to knock out Venusaur, and I have the outspeed on Venomoth, so risking his ace knocking out Venusaur just doesn't make a lot of sense. Following Koga, I take on Sabrina, Body Slam the Abra, then 1 turn of Swords Dance on the Kadabra, pray that it doesn't one-shot with a move like Psychic or use Kinesis. In this case, I survive the hit from Psychic, move on to the Alakazam. Venusaur has 3 more speed because of the badge boost and Body Slam one-shots. Prior to Blaine, 3 rare candies from 47 up to 50. This battle requires both luck and precision. 2 uses of Swords Dance against the Ninetales, then knock it out trying to avoid Confuse Ray. 1 more turn of Swords Dance on the Rapidash, which doesn't have a strong fire type move. Hope that it goes for something else, like Growl in this case. This did force me to squeeze in 1 more turn of Swords Dance for damage ranges on the Arcanine. I want to ensure that I one-shot it. Luckily, Rapidash just misses Fire Spin. I take care of it and the following Arcanine, defeating Blaine without a single reset. This is when I knew that this was going to be the run for Venusaur. Getting past Blaine without a reset feels incredibly good. Inside the Viridian City Gym, I fight 1 optional trainer. The result of this battle is not really going to be seen in the playthrough until later on. Also, if you look at the experience router, it seems to mess everything up by including this guy. If I take him out, then Venusaur levels up after Lorelei's final Pokemon, Bruno's final Pokemon, wait who? Agatha's final Pokemon, and Lance's final Pokemon. But I lose out on a damage rounding threshold for Lance's Aerodactyl. I don't want to get hit by Fly if I can avoid it. Giovanni is next. In this case, Razor Leaf for Dugtrio, then set up on Persian. It can knock out Venusaur, which happens here. It just spams Slash. This was a little bit unfortunate. Oh well, 1 reset, at least it was quick. By the way, I want to cover alternatives to how to play this fight. First of all, I could just spam Razor Leaf. It 2-shots the Persian, 2-shots the Nidoqueen, and 2-shots the Nidoking. I have kept Vine Whip on my set intentionally so that I can one-hit the Rhydon without having to use Razor Leaf and chancing the miss. This way I avoid multiple turns against the Persian and it's less likely to knock out. Also, the Nidos are incredibly ineffective against grass poison types. They just spam either Tail Whip or Leer. If I went back and played the fight again, I would do it this way. That would prevent this 1 reset for Venusaur. The other alternative here is giving up Vine Whip using Razor Leaf for the Rhydon and teaching Mimic for this fight. Then I can set up on Persian and sweep with Earthquake instead of Body Slam. I don't like this strategy at all because Dugtrio has Sand Attack. Rival 6, set up on Sandslash, sweep everything else. In Victory Road, grab 1 last rare candy. This brings Venusaur to 55 so that it has Sleep Powder for Lorelei. The way to lose here is getting a critical hit. If Venusaur does, it's not going to knock out the Lapras, and then maybe it's going to get completely destroyed by Blizzard. But if it doesn't, it will one-shot with Body Slam, but I don't. I get a critical hit, Lapras survives, goes for Blizzard, and Venusaur survives with more than half. No freeze. I go for Body Slam again, and this one doesn't crit. Give up Razor Leaf and Mimic Lick for Agatha. It's slow, but it gets the job done. Against Lance's Gyarados, I want to knock it out fairly efficiently, so I'm going to go for 1 turn of Swords Dance. But I level up after the Gyarados, so I put the first Dragonair to sleep, set up 2 more Swords Dances to outspeed the Aerodactyl, and on the second Dragonair, I Mimic Ice Beam. It is also possible to skip the setup on this first Dragonair, because with 1 turn of Swords Dance, I can one-shot both of the Dragonairs using Body Slam. I'll still Mimic Ice Beam, but then, against the Aerodactyl, I have a 69.7% chance to one-shot with Ice Beam. This is the more time-efficient approach to the Lance battle. After all, the Cool Trainer gives me this damage range. It drops to 37.3% if I don't fight him earlier on, because Venusaur is going to be level 57 for the Aerodactyl. I will admit that I was scared and I chickened out here because the run was going quite well up until now, so I got the 2 extra turns of Swords Dance, which badge boosts Venusaur's special enough that it one-shots the Aerodactyl with Ice Beam. The champion gives free setup with Sandslash, and here I want to mention a really cool Mimic. You can steal Thunderbolt from the Magneton because it is never going to choose Thunder Wave since it views electric moves as not very effective against Venusaur. This gives me a guaranteed 1-hit on the Cloyster that follows, and I never have to chance its Ice Beam or Aurora Beam. The only way to lose here is critting the Flareon with Body Slam, which is exactly what happens. It survives, however, I parry paralyze, Flareon can't move, and I finish it. With Venusaur, I get a follow-up time of 38 minutes and 33 seconds, with one reset at level 60, with a game time of 2 hours and 31 minutes. Okay, Fire-type fans, it's that moment that you've been waiting for. Is the Fire-type going to be redeemed in my solo challenges of Yellow, or are we going to finish this series with no Fire-types making it into the S tier? I will admit, going into these playthroughs with Charizard, I was not expecting it to do very well. I genuinely thought that I was going to get a time about 40 minutes or 41 minutes and just constantly be frustrated by this Pokemon. And you know, I think my predictions have been getting better and better as the years have gone on. I have learned these games inside and out. So Charizard, are you going to prove yourself to me today, or am I going to be frustrated with you once again? In Viridian Forest, we are going to fight the second bug catcher. His team is very fast to knock out since all of his Pokemon are one-shots with Ember. This levels up Charizard significantly to 9 before it takes on the mandatory bug catcher. This battle levels me up to 10 before Brock over a damage rounding threshold, which is really important here for Charizard. At level 10, Ember has a 4 hit on the Geodude and a 5 hit on the Onix. If Charizard doesn't fight the one optional bug catcher, then it has a 29.3% chance to 5-shot the Geodude and a guaranteed 6-shot. And things get much worse against the Onix. A 73.1% chance to 6-hit and a guaranteed 7-hit. The damage that Brock can put out is just too significant, making the fight a little bit too unstable without the one optional battle. Of course, you can win on minimum battles. Charizard could burn Brock's Pokemon every single turn, which would force Brock to use a full heal and minimize their attack stats. Also, getting a burn on turn 1 against the Geodude is incredibly helpful. I think playing this run with the one optional battle in the early game really just makes a lot more sense. Charizard isn't sacrificing that much time since it is so fantastic against all of the random Pokemon in the early game. On Route 3, fight the bug catcher for extra experience. This is actually important for Misty. Inside Mount Moon, pick up Mega Punch, complete Route 24 and 25, followed by the Rocket outside of Cerulean City. This gives Charizard just enough experience after the junior trainer inside Misty's gym to level up to 24. Dig has a one-shot on Staryu and a 63.1% chance to two-shot the Starmie. There is downside here. Misty can use Harden, she can use X-Defend while I'm underground with Dig, and Starmie can get massive critical hits. In this case, luckily with Water Gun, allowing Charizard to survive on 3 hit points. Misty also did not boost Starmie's defense, and so I secure the two-shot, and I get a 38-second time lead over my first run against the second gym leader. Pretty solid, pretty solid. This is a good early game improvement. And I have to say here, Charizard's early game is so much fun to play. I think it is the most fun of the 3 starters. Alright, I think I might be coming around to the Fire-type Lizard. On the SSN, Body Slam as well as the Rare Candy, Charizard has to be the most conservative with the use of these items throughout the playthrough. I'm going to be delaying using the first one until before Blaine. Dig has an 81.4% chance to knock out Surge's Raichu in one turn, so it's pretty unlikely that Charizard will lose this battle. Also, Thunderbolt only deals a maximum damage of 81%. Raichu would need to get a critical hit after surviving Dig. Pokemon Tower next, followed by Sylph. There are optional battles here for Charizard, the Machoke Trainer, then the mandatory Arbok, followed by the Protein Scientist. This gets Charizard to level 34, but unlike the other starters, I'm not going to fight the rival right away. Instead, I pick up Swords Dance and then escape the tower, going to Cycling Road next. I now have Earthquake, which speeds up the battle in comparison to using Dig against the Biker, plus I can use Swords Dance, which is immediately useful in Erica's gym. I fight the Cool Trainer for additional experience. Minimum battles from here up until Koga. For him, simply set up with Swords Dance all the way to +6 and then crush his team. Because I haven't used Rare Candies, Charizard doesn't have enough speed to move first against the Venomoth. In the department store, I purchased 2 Calcium for Charizard, but I could have instead purchased 2 Carbos. I don't think that speed is the right play though. Venomoth is not that scary for Charizard, plus I'm going to one-shot, and having better special for later in the run will be more important. With Koga out of the way, Charizard is level 39. Time to use Rare Candies. 7 of them, going all the way to level 46. This is where I teach Charizard Flamethrower in the place of Slash. Once I finish Pokemon Mansion, I have 2 more Rare Candies, and I use them now to get Charizard over the damage rounding threshold at level 48 before fighting Blaine. Using the candies here means I only need a single turn of Swords Dance to one-shot all 3 of Blaine's Pokemon, but there is slight downside for the Arcanine. Charizard has an 11.5% chance to miss this damage range, and then the Arcanine can survive. But none of its moves will do enough damage. The only way this battle really falls apart for Charizard is if it gets hit by Confuse Ray on turn 1 from the Ninetales. But I couldn't one-shot with Earthquake anyway, so this is just a risk that I have to take. Fighting Blaine in this order allows me to now backtrack to Sylph with Flamethrower one-shots on Sandslash and Cloyster, and then Earthquake one-shots on Magneton Harmattan, Kadabra, and Flareon. I don't even need to set up Swords Dance once here. Sabrina next. The maximum amount of damage with a critical hit from Alakazam's Psychic is 84%, so Charizard is going to win here no matter what. There's no reason to chance Kinesis on Kadabra to set up one turn of Swords Dance to one-shot the Alakazam. Giovanni is one battle I don't really like with Charizard. Flamethrower has a 29.8% chance to one-shot the Dugtrio, so I set up one turn of Swords Dance here and then one-shot with Body Slam instead. In order to avoid Rhydon's Rock Slide, I need another turn of Swords Dance, and I'm going to squeeze that in against Persian. This is where all the downside from the battle comes. I could get hit by Sand Attack from Dugtrio, and then Persian could do decent damage with Slash. While I do one-shot both of the Nidos with Earthquake, then on Rhydon, Charizard only has an 80.5% chance. And setting up one final turn of Swords Dance won't even fix this damage range. The failure mode for Charizard here is a critical hit. In this case, I get lucky, knock out the Rhydon in one hit, and move on with no resets. Rival 6, 2 Swords Dances on Sandslash, then sweep his entire team. Inside Victory Road, grab the rare candy. All 3 of the starters do this, none of them are skipping this item. But Charizard, unlike the other 2, is going to have to hold off on using it. It goes into the battle against Lorelei at level 54. Now Zealous Pawn and Austin were both helping me with all 3 of these starters. They were able to get some outrageous results with these Pokemon, which definitely made me frustrated. I was not able to get times nearly as good as them, as is typically the case. When discussing the intricacies of the strategies here with Charizard, both of them recommended to me that I don't try to get the Dugong to use Rest. Instead, just spam Swords Dance against it and then sweep Lorelei's entire team. While you might think this wouldn't be the best way to play here, remember that the chance for the Dugong to go for Rest on turn 2 is largely determined based on how its other moves have type effectiveness against your Pokemon. In this case, it's viewing both Bubble Beam and Aurora Beam as super effective against Charizard, and Rest is neutral, so it is much less likely to go for the Psychic type move. A lot of time can be wasted trying to fish for Rests from the Dugong. What this really comes down to is Bubble Beam going to lower Charizard's speed? Because if it does, then Jinx will move first, use Ice Punch, and Charizard's going to lose. I got so unlucky here. I had Bubble Beam drop my speed 4 times, giving Charizard 4 resets against Lorelei. By the way, there are a couple nuances here that I want to mention. You have to have your speed dropped twice by the Dugong, because then you can't badge boost yourself faster than the Jinx. And if it only has 1 speed drop, it has to get it right after your final use of Swords Dance, because badge boost can still save you up until that point. Also, if the Dugong lowers my attack with Aurora Beam, the fight is still not over because the extra badge boost helps Flamethrower's damage range against the Cloyster. In the 5th fight, finally I had no speed drops and I moved on with the battle, crushing the rest of her team. Things got a tiny bit sketchy against Agatha. I got paralyzed by the first Gengar. Luckily, I was able to survive the final Gengar's Psychic on red health and one-shot with Earthquake. The reason I didn't restart this run after 4 resets to Lorelei is because I also want to roll the dice against Lance. If I get an unlucky Lorelei but a lucky Lance, things are going to kind of balance themselves out. And it is very hard, unlike the other 2 starters, for Charizard to get through a run in Pokemon Yellow without a reset. We are waiting for the Gyarados to miss 1 turn of Hydro Pump against Charizard, and it does right away. I get 1 turn of Swords Dance in as a result, then 2 Body Slams to knock out the Gyarados, and from there, things are much easier. Before this fight, I used my final rare candy. This is so Charizard doesn't level up before the Aerodactyl. That preserves my 1 badge boost from the Gyarados, and this allows Ice Beam to one-shot all of his 3 final Pokemon. At least that's the theory. It has an 81.4% chance against the Aerodactyl, and surprisingly, I missed the range. Luckily, I froze the Aerodactyl. Lance does try to save it with a Hyper Potion. He doesn't have a full restore, so he can't cure the status condition, and because of that, I win. Even though I missed the damage range for a second time with Ice Beam. If you are wondering why I didn't use Fire Blast earlier in this playthrough, it is because I have saved it for the champion. It helps knock out Sandslash, Executor, and Cloyster. After 3 turns of Swords Dance, provided I don't miss, both Sandslash and Executor will be 1-hits, but the Cloyster is a little bit worse. Charizard has a 76.2% chance to knock it out. I get the range that I need today, Cloyster goes down, Flareon falls, and Charizard gets a time of 37 minutes and 52 seconds, with 4 resets at level 60, with a game time of 2 hours and 24 minutes. So, Fire-type fans, this is your day. We have got a Fire-type into the S tier at long last in Pokemon Yellow. Charizard just isn't built like any of the other Fire-types. It is the Fire-flying legendary Pokemon that Moltres wants to be. However, you get to choose this Pokemon right at the start of the playthrough, and in Yellow version, it is the first of the 3 starters that you get given by NPCs. Well, technically Bulbasaur kind of comes first, but you have to raise Pikachu's friendship. For whatever reason in my playthroughs, I was never able to do that by the time I got to the Bulbasaur, so Charmander was always the first one that I picked up. Doing these playthroughs with all three of the starters, it's really changed my perspective on both Charizard and Venusaur. I still prefer the grass type's design to Charizard, but in this case, I don't prefer its playthrough. I used to like it because it is much more consistent when you don't use rare candies during runs like this. Sleep Powder and Razor Leaf are amazing moves, and even though it has a slow start, Charizard loses out in consistency of the late game because Lorelei and Lance are pretty bad. However, when going for the fastest possible result, Venusaur's early game just slows it down too much. Look at these timeline graphs. Venusaur, by the time it beats Surge, is just so far behind both Blastoise and Charizard. Now, Blastoise remains the best starter to use in Pokemon Yellow, which is what I found last time I played these three. With the results from my new playthroughs, Blastoise gets a spot just behind Nidoking as the third ranked Pokemon overall. It's worth noting though that both Victreebel and Nidoking's times are significantly faster than Blastoise. More than a minute separates Nidoking and Blastoise. The same is not true though for Kingler. It's only behind Blastoise by 14 seconds. And it is worth noting that Kingler has a lower game time when compared with Blastoise. If given infinite runs, I think that Kingler would edge out Blastoise as the best water type in the game, but that's not my format. So Blastoise takes the crown now as the best water type in the game. And speaking of water types, I have completed every single one in Pokemon Yellow. Overall, this typing is really good in Pokemon Yellow, despite the endless frustrations that it has against the champion's Magneton. There are 6 water types in the S tier, and there are 9 in the A tier, making the distribution of these Pokemon extremely top heavy. I think it's also worth noting that a bunch of the runs in the lower portion of the tier list were done quite a while ago. Poliwrath most definitely needs a re-ranking. It is going to get S tier or A tier if I am very unlucky. I would be incredibly surprised if Poliwrath isn't able to pull off a sub 40 time though. I recently played both Slowpoke and Psyduck, but everything else is pretty stale now, so I think over time, if I continue to do Pokemon Yellow streams, that kind of thing, I think that all of these Pokemon are just going to continue shuffling their way towards the top of the tier list. Despite me not really liking to play these types in the game, they are honestly fantastic. Back over to the main tier list, Venusaur on the other hand was not able to compete with a Pokemon like Victreebel. It still did get itself an S tier placement, but of the 3 starters, it was the worst performer today. It earned itself a spot behind Articuno and just ahead of Snorlax. That's also it for grass types in this game. We have 2 in the S tier, Victreebel and Venusaur. I do think that Vileplume is most deserving of a promotion here. Also, maybe Bellsprout. It's been quite a while since I played it. I did come back and try to do a re-ranking video with it, as well as a stream. Yeah, things did not go well. Bellsprout is pretty slow, and for that reason, it can't make use of Sleep Powder quite as effectively as the other grass types. And I think we can see that trend playing out with most of these grass Pokemon. There are the ones that outperform because they're decently fast, they have sleep-inducing moves, and they also get Swords Dance. And then we have the lower performing grass types, the ones that have bad sleep-inducing moves like Hypnosis, they lack Swords Dance, or maybe they're just too slow to effectively use their sleep-inducing moves. Also, we have the disaster that is Tangela down in the F tier. That thing is such a tragedy. And speaking of tragedies in Generation 1, let's talk about the fire type. Charizard earns itself a fittingly legendary performance, just behind Zapdos, ahead of Poliwhirl and Articuno. For me, this is the perfect placement in the tier list for Charizard. It both gives us a fire type S tier result, and it also emphasizes just how bad Moltres really is. Unlike the water type, which is very top heavy but is kind of a pizza shape from there, the fire type is more similar to the grass type. It has 2 bands of performance, Charizard, and then Pokemon that are not Charizard. If you support my content through Patreon or YouTube memberships, thank you so much. It means the world to me. We are truly at the end of Pokemon Yellow. There are only 4 more videos from here, so stay tuned for next week when I play the game with only Dragonite. But before then, there's a bunch of other videos because Daily December is continuing. If you've made it this far, you're incredible. I'll see you tomorrow. Surprise, I'm back. I want to end this video with a small addendum. A lot of time with these Versus videos, we are producing them very last minute because I have either procrastinated or failed to get a run that I was satisfied with. We were, as usual, running behind on this video, and so Zealous Pawn and Austin only got to review it last minute. Zealous Pawn provided some really interesting context that I do want to bring up here because I think it's important for all of you, especially if you're a Charizard fan, like I am now. First of all, Charizard has the ability to play a much more aggressive route throughout the game. This is of course riskier, and it's why I chose not to do it in this video. Second, look at my game time between Blastoise and Charizard. Blastoise has 222 and Charizard has 223. These two are really close even when Charizard is playing conservatively. And third, we are going to go through Zealous Pawn's results. With Venusaur, he had a time of 37.21 and a game time of 2.25. With Blastoise, he had a time of 34.57 with a game time of 2.18. And with Charizard, he eventually got a time of 34.40 with a game time of 2.17. What this demonstrates is there is a scenario where Charizard can be the best starter out of the three. And I think that's worth stating in this video because my thoughts on the Pokemon have really taken a 180. I don't want anyone to get confused though. This time with Charizard is faster than my Victory Bell playthrough by 18 seconds. But it's not fair to compare these things. Zealous Pawn is a much better player at Pokemon Yellow than I am. If he played Victory Bell, I am 100% confident that he would get a better time than Charizard. Also, my format has always and will always prioritize consistency of results because I just don't have time to do 10 plus playthroughs with every single Pokemon. And for that reason, I do think that Blastoise today is the fair winner. See you tomorrow when I play Pokemon Crystal with Xatu and Noctowl.